Happy Halloween, everyone. Enjoy over 3 hours of allegedly true and terrifying Halloween stories in this episode. This is a compilation of past Halloween episodes that will chill you to your bones. Enjoy, stay safe, and have the best Halloween ever. Don't forget to send me your stories at darkstories.org for a chance to have them narrated. Now, let's begin. Garden Gargoyle by your typical 5th grader. I used to live near this really creepy old lady. I believe someone else lived there with her, but I never saw them around. I've actually never seen them. I was in the 5th grade around this time as well, and I always walked home from school those days. One day I was walking home from a long day of school, and keep in mind I walked past this lady's home. I took a quick glance at the woman's lawn. There had always been this old rusty fence around their yard. It couldn't really keep anything out, and I'm not sure why it was there, but it added to the eerie appearance. Anyway, when I looked over, a man, probably 30 to 40 years old, was walking around the yard, fixing all the little knickknacks that had been spread across it recently. Things like those trashy fake flamingos and such. I can't really remember exactly what was there. When I saw him, he was cleaning off this creepy gargoyle they had on the porch. I always hated that thing. It had been there when I moved in, and still there to that day. I searched for gargoyles on random shopping websites and found the one they owned on Wayfair. I'm not even sure if it's still for sale there anymore. I was also 90% sure that thing was cursed. I don't know a lot about gargoyles, neither what exactly their purpose is, but I do know one thing. Their gargoyle was evil. I remember some details of it. It had eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you go. The stone it was carved in was dark, almost black. It had small wings, disproportionate to its body. It also had little horns and small legs with large claws. No arms. It basically looked like the type of crappy Halloween decoration you could buy at the mall or at Walmart. It was that time of year, after all. This memory brings me to the real story. After a few days, as we stepped closer to Halloween that year, I had forgotten about the man and the gargoyle. It was late one night. I hadn't been able to sleep, so I had taken some medicine to help. I was waiting for it to kick in while watching YouTube videos. Around midnight, I heard something that sounded like a rock hitting my window. At first, I gave no thought to it, not even trying to explain it away, just ignoring it. Then came another rock, clanging against the window. This time, I got up, then walked over to the window, peeking through the blinds. I swear to God, I can't explain this. That little gargoyle was now sitting on our lawn, looking directly into my eyes. I couldn't even gather the courage to scream. I always thought of myself as a brave person. Most stories and movies didn't scare me, hardly anything did. But at that moment, it felt way too real. The thing crawled towards the window in an instant, and I hadn't even moved yet. I was sure that I was having a horrible nightmare, a really, really vivid one. I took a few clumsy steps backward, not wanting to see the thing crawling towards me anymore. I knew it could break my window with its leg, or with a wing, or even its head, like a kid throwing a rock. But as I fell back onto my bed, staring at the blinds, waiting for something to happen, it never did. I waited for hours, ready for something to crash through my window, but nothing happened. As I waited and waited in suspense, I eventually fell asleep, staring at the blinds. I woke up in the morning and quickly ran over to the window and peeked through the blinds to see the gargoyle was in its original position in their yard. and it was as if it never happened. But it felt so real. To this day, I walk past that statue on the way home, constantly wondering if it was a dream or if it really happened, constantly watching, waiting for that gargoyle to look back at me and confirm to me my worst fear. A Ghostly Predator by Sherilyn T. I have had a few paranormal experiences, some interesting, others quite frightening, but this one really stands out as the most disturbing thing to have ever happened to me. It was on Halloween night in 2004, and it was a really long and stressful year. I had ended a long-time abusive marriage that took a long, grueling 2 years to finalize. I was transitioning into the role of being a single parent, as well as experiencing life again as a single woman. I had been invited to my good friend's Halloween party across town. I called one of my best girlfriends and asked if she wanted to go with me. I was excited when she agreed, and we set about the fun task of planning our costumes. I wanted to go as a hippie, and my friend Jane went as a pirate. I was excited at the prospect of doing something special that night, as my daughter was with her father, and it would be the first time that I didn't go trick-or-treating with her. Jane and I arrived at the Halloween party fashionably late. It was a fun party with the house decorated brilliantly and plenty of savory eats and drinks. As we made our way around the room, I noticed that everyone attending the party were a couple, except for Jane and myself. I began to feel very out of place because I was single. I'd never enjoyed dating and much preferred to have one special someone in my life. I left the party feeling depressed and a bit hopeless. Most of the single men I had met so far were not interested in someone who had a child. When I arrived home around midnight, I went straight to bed, hoping sleep would block out my bad feelings and that I would feel better in the morning. But that wasn't to be. That night, I woke up drenched in sweat from a nightmare where an evil man was out to get me. But when I woke up, I felt every millimeter of a man's hand on my right hip. I tried to move, but my arms had been pinned down, and the weight of someone else on me was too heavy. I could see the outline of a man above me, but not the details. It was similar to the way the Predator was invisible in the original movie. I struggled to get the words out of my mouth for him to get off of me. After a couple of tries, I finally was able to yell out. He climbed off the bed and proceeded to walk over to the doorway and into the hallway. He leaned against the doorframe and lingered there for a moment. Terrified, I kept saying to him, "Please go away, please." I had never been so scared. He eventually walked further away, but this time stayed leaning on the stair railing. Then at some point, he simply faded away, like a strange wind had collected him. The next morning, I called a woman who was a psychic. I filled her in on all the details of what happened the evening before. She told me that when we are feeling negative and depressed feelings, we leave ourselves open to events like the one I experienced, open and vulnerable to demons and spirits. After a banishing ceremony, she left on her way, and ever since I haven't experienced another thing like it. But every time I go to bed anymore, I want to cry at the thought that I might wake up and that figure will be back. Look at Them Run by Jess O'Hara. If you're from the Peru Converse area of Indiana, you probably know about Okefenokee. If you don't, here's a brief rundown. Okefenokee is the local name for part of the Francis Slocum State Park, where County Road 510 East abruptly ends in Peru, Indiana. The road merely makes a circle and doubles back into itself, and it's only a stone's throw from the Mississauga River. Many who have visited it claim it's haunted, but if you try to look it up online, you'll get a lot of inconclusive results. Supposedly, at the turn of the last century, a 7-year-old girl named Stephanie was found brutalized in the woods in the 1960s, along with 4 bodies without their heads found in the circle formed in the road. More recently, a man was beaten to his demise in a robbery gone bad in May of 2018. You can see scratches on one of the trees. They look like they're made of a deer scraping its antlers on bark, but they're horizontal and have space for an opposable thumb. There's said to be a small shack in the forest somewhere, and people have reported shadow people and voices on the paths. Stephanie herself is said to scream if you get too far away from your group, so you don't get led away and brutalized like she was. So, for your own sake, don't go visit around Halloween. This story will show you why. One of my best friends, Kay, lives in Amboy, which is like 20 minutes away. She grew up in a Wiccan family, and she always said she was sensitive to the presence of spirits. In mid-August a few years ago, she, her young brother and sister, and a collection of her cousins decided they would go out and walk around. They were mostly teenagers after all, and they wanted to hunt some ghosts, but they ended up getting much more than they bargained for. About mid-afternoon, they reached the circle, parked, and got out. There was still enough light to see, and they planned to walk through the woods and leave before nightfall. 3 yards or so from the edge of the circle, the path split in two and branched out. Therefore, half the party went one way and the other half went the other. Kay's cousin Alex was impatient to get going. He was walking faster, getting himself 50 or 60 feet ahead of his group. The path sloped at one side, and there was a wet spot there that he jumped over. As soon as he did, they all heard a loud scream that sounded like it belonged to a little girl. Needless to say, that put an end to their exploration very quickly. They went back the day before Halloween with a group of 11 people, but this also proved to be a mistake. The group included Kay, her parents and siblings, Alex and his 2 brothers, and 2 of her brother's friends. They started out at mid-afternoon again, but nothing really happened until after nightfall. By then, everyone was ready to go home, and they were walking toward the edge of the woods, where they had parked their cars, when Kay froze. Something like a cold hand felt like it had reached onto her chest and gripped her diaphragm. She could not breathe. "We need to get out of here," Kay said to Alex and Daniel. "Right now." Seeing and hearing her in that state, they all ran back to the circle. As the family piled into the cars to leave, Kay and Alex waited near the tailgate of her father's truck to avoid the commotion and watched the forest. In the shadows, Kay could make out the shape of a man nearly 7 feet tall, just watching them. Alex's eyes were trained the same way, and he leaned toward Kay. "You see it too, don't you?" Kay nodded, and she and Alex booked it into the truck. On their way out of that forest, the same black shape followed them through the trees from the circle to the cornfield out on the main road. Kay says she was sure that if there hadn't been 10 yards between the woods and the cornfield, that thing would have followed them further. As soon as Kay got home, she placed down lines of salt in her room at the window frame and inside the door. It is said that it keeps spirits at bay, as any fan of Supernatural will tell you. But there was one last thing to terrify the family that night. Turns out, Kay's mother had a digital recorder recording the entire thing, and based solely on the EVP it caught. I urge you, if you're ever thinking of visiting Okefenokee, don't do it during October or the first week of November, because that's when the separation between the living and the not living is at its thinnest. That's when evil things are stronger than any other time of year. You might go home with more than you came with. Their EVP said. Look at them run. They're scared. It Followed Us Home by Chase C. It was October of 2016 in Michigan. Me and my cousin experienced something that we will never forget. It was a cool October Friday, and I had just gotten out of school. It was the weekend, and I was going to spend it at my cousin's house. When I arrived, we immediately went to the basement, where we played Xbox. After a while of playing, I decided to get something to eat from upstairs. I returned with a Hot Pocket and some dill pickled chips. I also noticed my friend was on the phone with his friend from school. He asked if we wanted to hang out with him. I agreed. We then walked about 3 miles to his friend's place, where we stayed for a couple more hours playing Xbox and talking to girls on social media until it got dark. But before we left, we decided to amp up the fear factor and told each other some scary stories. After all, it was Halloween, or close enough to it. As we were leaving, my cousin told me of a spot near his house in the woods that he had seen when he went hunting. He told me he wanted to explore it some more, but not by himself, so I said I would join him. When we got home, we suited up, then headed outside. It was probably 38 degrees out and especially windy. We traversed through the woods to the spot my cousin had mentioned. As we arrived, I felt very uneasy, like I was being watched. But this feeling wasn't a normal feeling of being watched. It literally felt like I was being stalked by someone. I didn't mention it because we had just gotten there, and I didn't want my cousin to be scared and ruin the excitement and fun, so I kept it to myself. We walked for another 30 yards, where we both stopped for a moment to scan the surroundings. We both had family that were in the military, so we were taught to always scan and be aware of our surroundings. We looked around for a little while when my cousin tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to a huge oak tree to the left. I looked at it and saw that there was a dark silhouette next to the tree. We both kneeled quickly and quietly and waited for any signs of movement coming from it, but after a good 5 minutes, without it moving at all or making any noise, we decided it was nothing, probably just a big rock or a bush. We both laughed and taunted each other, saying we were scared of nothing, but I truly was because of the feeling I had earlier. We stood in the darkness after exploring this entire area of the woods. I had to admit it was nice to get out of the house for a while. We were talking about a girl that he had a crush on at school, when we were suddenly interrupted by coyote chatter. Very, very loud and obnoxious coyote chatter. We could tell they were close. We were startled by the sudden outbreak of noise. We began to walk back toward the house when the noise suddenly grew louder and louder. I would say they were probably 350 feet away from where we were. Now, I'm no animal expert, but I'm not sure any animal will run straight towards a human twice their size, unless they're cornered, hungry, or rabid. But these coyotes, there were 3 of them, and they ran straight for us. We screamed, thinking they were going to attack us, so I picked up a fallen branch nearby, ready to defend myself until the end. But they ran right past us. One even ran in between me and my cousin, like they didn't even know we were there. Extremely shaken up and confused, we turned back to see that they were still running in the same direction. We looked at each other in amazement, then looked ahead to see a massive thing standing near the edge of the tree line, something taller than we were, even though it was standing on all 4s. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before, TV or otherwise. We both froze as we had a staring contest with this unknown thing. We stood there for a good 2.5 minutes when it turned around and ran. It was probably just as surprised as we were to see each other. It was a fight or flight situation, and we definitely were not going to win that fight. We turned around and ran back as fast as we could run. When we arrived back at the house, we were out of breath. We got back inside and told everyone still awake what we'd experienced. It was late. We were amazed and terrified. We didn't go to sleep that night, fueling our bodies with 5-hour energies and Monster energy drinks. The next night is when I decided to go home early, because as I was looking out the window toward the woods, I saw 2 familiar yellow eyes gazing back. The Costume Ball Creeper by Wonderblocks. I had recently turned 21, and this happened last year. I had been invited to a Halloween ball at a high-class venue. My friends and I all dressed up as angels, and about 7:45 that night, we arrived at the venue. As we were walking in, we noticed a rather beat-up black pickup truck pull into the parking lot. It gave my friends and I pause for a moment before we continued on with our night. After all, maybe that was part of their costume. Over the next hour, I danced and had some food with friends, but the entire time I noticed a creepy-looking man staring at me. I thought to myself, why is this old man here? Why is he looking at me like that? At one point, I left to go to the bathroom. The room was completely deserted. Usually, the bathrooms are packed with smokers and drinkers. Being alone in there made me a little bit nervous. I hurried into the stall and began to do my business. Just as I was exiting the stall, I heard the door to the bathroom open ever so slowly, as if the person entering was trying their best not to raise suspicion. I took a peek through the crack in the stall door. As soon as I saw who it was, my jaw fell to the floor. It was the same dirty old man who had been staring at me earlier. The man was opening each stall door and saying out loud, "I know you're in here," in the creepiest voice I've ever heard. I covered my mouth to hide my heavy breathing and climbed on top of the toilet, hoping that he wouldn't see me. When he stopped at my stall door, he opened it. I began to scream, but the man covered my mouth with his hand as he rushed inside. He said to me, "You're coming with me. Make one sound, and it's over." Just then, as if by some miracle, one of the staff from the kitchen came into the bathroom. She saw the man pulling a knife from his back from his jeans. She immediately ran out of the bathroom screaming. Someone called the police, and they showed up rather quickly. The moment the woman had seen him, the man let go of me and ran out of the bathroom, trying to flee the scene. But the cops had shown up so fast that they were able to find the man and arrest him. I couldn't be more thankful that that kitchen worker had come into the bathroom at just the right time. Any later, and I definitely wouldn't be here to share this story. It may be best if you're going to a bathroom in a public place and you've been getting crazy eyes from someone across the room. Take a friend with you. Back Roads by D. Phillips. It was Halloween night, and I was staying over at a friend's place. Let's call her H. H and I had nothing to do that night, as we had finished our trick-or-treating only a few hours ago. We decided to call her friend P and have him come pick us up. It was around 11:30 when P came by, and though H and P were friends, I wasn't very fond of him. Once we picked up H's boyfriend, we decided it would be fun to go to somewhere that was supposedly haunted. You know, because of the Halloween spirit. I suggested one place that was a back road of this abandoned car dealership. Behind the dealership, there was a dirt road that took you far back into the woods, and supposedly, there used to be a small church there that was rumored to be the home of a satanic cult, one that supposedly sacrificed people. It eventually got burned down due to angry people who believed that they had been brainwashing and kidnapping children. H and me were excited, but P had to stop at a Walmart real quick to get some flashlights. After that, we put the location into the GPS and headed on our way. Once we got close, the GPS began to glitch, telling us to make a U-turn. It was like the GPS, which was an offline dashboard GPS, didn't know the road even existed anymore, even though it had led us all the way here. The road took longer to get down than we had expected, about 10 to 15 minutes. Once we arrived, it was 2 a.m. We got to the end of the road, where the church used to be. It was eerie. You could still see the foundation of where the building used to be. Behind the foundation was a railroad track, and in the middle of the foundation, it looked as if people came back here and had made a fireplace using old bricks. It had a very creepy vibe, but I'm into that kind of stuff, so I loved it. 20 minutes go by, and me and H are on the railroad with flashlights, talking and looking around. The boys were down near the fireplace, and that's when H said she heard something, like rustling in the nearby woods, so she freaked out, and the boys came to her rescue. I figured it was just animals. As they were calming her down, I started to walk further up the tracks. After a few minutes of nothing, I rejoined the group. As I'm walking towards them, I begin to hear something like someone walking over leaves, but I assumed once again that it was just animals. But then came a female voice screaming, echoing right out of the woods. I freaked out, and so did the rest of us. Instantly, we dashed to the car waiting for P to get in, so we could get the heck out of there. After a couple of minutes, P finally got in the car and was refusing to leave. I was getting mad and started arguing with them. He told me that if whoever that was in trouble, that we can't just leave them. I mean, I get it, but H seemed seconds away from having a panic attack, and I prioritized my friend over a stranger. I eventually got him to take us back to H's house. I don't know what we heard that night. I always try to reassure myself that maybe it was just some kids pranking us or something, but the church was deep in the woods, off an abandoned road, and we hadn't seen any other cars or bikes near the place, and the closest town was over 8 miles away. Nobody ever believed us either, but still, we never went back. Pre-Slumber Party Horror by Ika Pika. It was Halloween week. I was about 8 years old, living in the middle at the end of a road, 2 houses away from a set of railroad tracks. My best friend lived across the street from us, and 1 house closer to the tracks. Her name was Laura. My street being at the end of the road, the only people who came down to it were those of us who lived here, mostly old folks, the mailman and our occasional visitors. It was the first night ever I was going to have a friend spend the night with me, one that wasn't my cousin or my mom's friends' kids. As you could guess, I was incredibly excited. I had stayed over at her place before, but I'd never had her over before for the night. Laura lived with her grandparents, and off and on her mother would live there as well. I wanted her over as early as possible, that way we could play longer, but I had daily chores that needed to be done. Once I was finished, I could barely contain my excitement anymore, so my mom agreed to let me go get Laura. Without hesitation, I said thank you and ran out the door, crossing the street. On my way over, I noticed a strange van parked in front of Laura's neighbor's house directly across the street from mine. It was what you could describe as a creeper van. It was a dark burgundy color, with only windows in the front, the type that would be made into an ice cream van. I slowed as I passed it, to see if there was anyone inside. I had to walk behind it to get to Laura's place, so I couldn't see, but I could hear people arguing from within. When I made it to Laura's place, her grandma was on the porch smoking a cigarette. She knew I was there to get Laura, so she just told me to go on in. I helped Laura pack a few things such as clothes and a few things to play store, a little game we made to get rid of things we didn't want anymore and let our friends have what they wanted. We anxiously ran back upstairs and out the door. Less than halfway down her walkway across the front yard, we heard a woman say, "Towel! Towel! Get me a towel!" Laura and I both turned and were paralyzed to see a woman with a shredded face staring back at us. Her skin was torn to pieces, and there were parts hanging off of her. She continued begging for a towel, stepping closer with each word. Laura's grandmother, who was still on the porch, threw a towel over her face. The moment we couldn't see her anymore, we ran as fast as we could to my house. In a split second, we were locked in my room with the window shades cracked slightly so we could see what was going on. A few minutes go by and an ambulance and several police cars show up. They get a statement from Laura's grandma and her mom. We found out a few days later that the woman was a dealer who was trying to make a deal with Laura's mom. When she refused, the woman tried to get her dog to attack Laura's mom, but in turn the dog attacked her instead. That was who I had heard arguing in the van just before seeing Laura. It was only a week or so before Halloween. So with our terrible sense of humor, we joked that the woman had the perfect Halloween face, and to this day we don't know what became of the woman. The dog had to be put down because the woman had abused it so badly that it was vicious towards anyone, no matter what they tried to do to calm it. It was altogether a horrifying and terrible situation. Alone in the Aisle by Beth R. It was my best friend Lily's birthday. She had been my best friend since 7th grade. I went to Kmart to find her a gift. I was 16 at the time, and still couldn't watch a scary movie without crying. I knew exactly what to get her, so I went to the makeup aisle, which was at the back of the store. It was October and the store was almost empty, and no one was there. I walked past the Halloween decorations, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this man who was staring right at me. I ignored it, and I wondered how long he had been staring. I got this eerie feeling of being watched, but did my best to try to ignore it. I was practically the only one in the store. I turned my head just in time to see someone walking into the other side of the aisle. I move on to the lipstick, and there's a man standing there. He looked homely, like he was living on the streets. I was very uncomfortable around him and nervous. He turned and looked at me and smiled. I was so nervous I moved to another aisle, but he just followed me, and then he grabbed me by my arm. When his hand touched me, it was cold and dry and terrible. I felt empty inside and screamed. An employee ran over and shoved him off of me. I ran to the front desk and the lady working there called the cops. I explained to him how he looked. Homely, gray hair, brown eyes, with a beard. They searched around the store, but they could not find him after he took off. They checked the security footage in the back. And here's where it gets weird. When they came back out, the lady was giving me suspicious eyes. "Ma'am," she said, "we just checked the cameras. There was no man in the store like that." "What? That's impossible," I said. I even told them that one of the employees had helped me. I even explained what the employee looked like and what aisle I was in when it happened. But they didn't have an employee that matched that description, and they said that the tape showed no one when I was over there, just me in the makeup aisle. I quickly went home, more confused and terrified than I had ever been. October Creeper by Ruby. This happened several years ago. My best friend Will and I were working on a souvenir booth with my aunt at the local haunted house, which opened every Friday and Saturday night in October, plus Halloween. At the time, Will wasn't old enough to be an actor in the actual haunt. I'm a couple of years older than him, but I decided to work the souvenir booth with him so that he'd have someone to talk to. Anyway, it was really cold one night, and I wanted to get some hot chocolate. There was a small convenience store that was about a 5-minute walk from the haunted house, and I knew that they sold hot chocolate. So Will and I walked to the store, and when we got there, the parking lot was mostly empty, except for a red truck at the gas pumps. As we started toward the store, the guy in the truck called us over. Stupidly, we went over to see what he wanted. I wish to God we had just ignored him. He started to ask us all these questions. Then he takes out a pocket knife and asks us to cut his face. We were speechless. He then goes on to explain that he got in a fight with his wife or girlfriend or whatever, and she smashed a beer bottle over her head and was going to tell the cops he did it. So he wanted to cut his face so he could tell the cops that she attacked him. Will was actually considering it, and I was standing off to the side, freezing cold and shaking, trying to get Will to walk away from this freak. Then Will lets it slip that we're just friends, and that Will is gay, and of course the guy had assumed we were together until Will said that. And that's when things went from bad to worse. He asks Will, "How much do you want for me to have a night with her?" I swear to God, my heart stopped beating when he said that. He was talking about me. I've dealt with creeps before, but none of them have ever said anything like that. Will, bless his heart, said, "No, she's off limits." But the guy wasn't easily dissuaded. He kept pushing for me to come with them and offered to drive us both to town. We could find a nice tree somewhere, he said. At this point, I wanted to run, but Will was still standing there, and I wasn't about to leave him alone. Then the creep, as he begins to scratch his face, then he asked if we had anything on us, substance-wise. We told him we didn't do that kind of stuff. He also offered to give us a ride back to the haunted house, and I said no. It's just a 5-minute walk away. Finally, after asking us one last time if we wanted a ride, he got in his truck and sped off, peeling out and going well over the speed limit. I was shaking. Once he was gone, we went inside the store and told the woman working there what happened. I think she said she would check the security cams to see if she could get the license plate number. We stayed in the store a little while longer, then headed back to the haunted house. Halfway there, a cop car pulled up behind us. I'd never been so relieved to see a police officer in my life. We figured he was going to stop us because we were smoking and wanted to see if we were underage, but whatever reason, he never got around to telling us. We walked right up to him and told him everything that happened, and he drove off to find the guy. When we got back to the haunted house, we told security and the people working in the ticket booth what happened, in case the creep decided to show up there. We didn't leave the haunted house for the rest of the night, and I never got my hot chocolate. Ceiling Vent by Hannah. I've had a lot of weird experiences in middle school, but nothing matches up to this one. There were rumors all around my school that it was haunted. I didn't put a lot of weight into ghosts and stuff. I never believed anything until I saw it. It was around Halloween. When I was younger, I loved Halloween. I still do to this day, but this story kind of ruined it for me. It was a Friday and everyone was so pumped for the weekend. It was 7th period math, so just a few more hours to go in the school day. This class was a few classes after lunch, so of course I asked to go to the bathroom after the teacher was done doing his thing, and he gave us our assignment. He said yes. I took the pass and walked to the closest bathroom. I've had weird vibes in this bathroom before, but I've always brushed them off as nothing. Well, I was doing my thing when I heard the bathroom door open. This didn't bother me, like, okay, cool, someone else was coming in here to do their business. But I didn't hear or see any footsteps, so I thought someone was messing with me or something. But then the sink turned on. It was motion activated, so it wouldn't turn on unless someone moved in front of it. I was beginning to panic a little bit. I felt someone watching me, and I began to hear little scratches on my stall like someone's nails going down it, but there was no feet at all in the bathroom when I looked down. The scratching suddenly stopped when another student came into the bathroom to check on me because I was taking so long. She could tell I was scared by something and immediately asked me, "So, do you believe it now?" I just wanted out of that bathroom. I don't think I'd have ever been that creeped out.
The camera that pictured more than a window. Submitted by Zero. This happened when I was young. I don't remember my exact age at the time. It was October, and my dad asked my brothers and I what we wanted to do for Halloween. I said something scary, maybe a haunted house. He took it into consideration. Then on the day of Halloween, he took us on his ghost tour. We went up to this building where the tour guides would be, and a short lady stood beside a sign. She was obviously our tour guide. We waited for everybody else to get there before it all began. The group began walking along the street. As the lady took us to sites that were supposed to be haunted, I rolled my eyes here and there in disbelief. I've always thought the whole haunted thing was fun, but bogus. I just thought the whole thing was a cash scheme, especially when she scared someone in our group to get a reaction. But my mind would soon be swayed as we reached a black metal fence with a bright white house behind it. The woman went on to talk about how it was supposedly haunted, how a girl who was not that old had died in the house from a disease in the 1900s. She also pointed to a window and said people who have taken pictures there of that window would often see her ghost, because beyond that window was apparently the room she had passed away in. I smirked. Of course I didn't believe it, and being arrogant enough to want to prove her wrong, I took out my camera that I'd gotten for my birthday and zoomed in on that very window. I snapped a picture and waited for it to come up on the screen. When it did though, I froze. It was in bright red tint, and someone was standing there in the window. I stared down at that picture on my phone, trying to think of reasons why the picture came out weird, not wanting to admit that it really might have been the ghost, but I failed to convince myself. It was so detailed. Someone was standing in that window, someone who wasn't there when I snapped the shot. I ran over to show my dad, and when I handed him the phone and he looked at it, he said, "I don't see anything." And when I pulled the phone away to look, the red tint was gone, and the figure beyond the window was no longer there. Things don't just disappear into thin air, especially a solitary photo. I stepped back and took another picture of the window, but this one, it turned out normal, to my dismay. No matter how many more pictures I took, I couldn't get the same effect. Nevertheless, it scared me pretty bad. I didn't get very good sleep for a few days. I used to be one of those people that didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but I know what I saw. It's one of the things that made me finally believe that these things could be real. Scary Night Patrol. Submitted by Mitchell H. When I was younger, my uncle was a cop. He'd often come over to our house, telling us stories of how he busted another baddie, or something along the lines of that. One Halloween, my brother and I asked him if he had any scary experiences as a cop. He looked at us with a kind of pale face and said, "Yeah, if you'd really like to hear it, I can tell you to. But you have to promise you won't tell your mother." We knew we had struck gold, so we excitingly nodded and sat down near the fireplace. Nothing's better than a scary story on Halloween night. He begins. One night about 10 p.m., when I was rostered to work, I got a text from my boss saying my partner was very sick and would be off work for a while. It would take a day or two to be assigned a temporary partner, and I said it'd be okay until then to work alone. I didn't mind. It gave me some time to think, so I got to work that night, clocked in, grabbed my gun and car keys, then went out to the lot to hop into my patrol car. I noticed that the fuel gauge was pretty low, so I just called my boss and said I'd fill it up later and ask to be reimbursed. That was usually how it went. I went along my merry way to begin my patrol, thinking I'd fill up the gas in about an hour or so. The patrol was completely normal for that hour, but it was soon time to fill up, so I pulled into the fuel station and began to fill up the patrol car. As I was about halfway done, I noticed a man dressed in ragged clothes. He was walking past the station while whispering to himself. I couldn't tell exactly what he was saying, but it still kind of creeped me out. I mean, he hadn't done anything wrong, so I didn't want to just go and question him. I just finished filling up, went inside and paid for my fuel. Finally leaving the gas station, I drove in the direction of the man that was walking, just out of pure curiosity, but I didn't see him. I drove for nearly 2 miles in that direction along those streets. I was beginning to think that maybe he just wandered off into the bush. I started to put my mind at ease, but right then, I saw him coming up in the headlights. Again, I was nearly 2 miles away from the station now. This didn't make any sense. How could he have gotten so far away in only a few short minutes on foot? He was on the side of the road, walking away from me. His hands were fidgeting, and he was covered in those same ragged clothes. There was no mistaking it. It was the same guy. Even as I got closer and rolled my window down, I could hear that same whispering coming from him, even from over the car's engine. As I drove past, I kept looking at him. I wanted to get a better look at his face. I wanted to make sure he was okay and not hopped up on dangerous drugs. For all I knew, he could have been a danger to himself and others. But when I slowly passed him and I saw his face, I was far more than disturbed. That face, it was solid white, like a bedsheet, and his eyes were glossed over like a pair of clear marbles in his eye sockets. No pupil, no veins, just white. His appearance shocked me so much, I naturally looked in the rear view, and I was horrified when I saw him running at full sprint, keeping up with my car, which had now accelerated to about 40 miles an hour. I turned my lights on, slammed on the brakes, and I spun around reaching for my gun, ready to get out of the car, and nothing. There was no one there. The man, he had somehow vanished. My body was covered in goosebumps. I reholstered my weapon, turned the lights off, and returned to my route. As you can imagine, I never told anyone about this, as everyone would have just laughed. So I've kept it pretty much to myself. I saw something out of this world that night, something that didn't have very good intentions. And that's my uncle's story. I've asked about it ever since we heard it, and to this day he has never found out what it was that he saw. He can't seem to make a theory up of what makes sense to him, but he does know that he's thankful that he hasn't run into that man again. Stay safe this Halloween, and keep your eyes out for the man with the white eyes. Halloween Terror, submitted by Isabella. I was around 11 years old, and it was Halloween night. The sky was an ominous shade of dark gray, and the moon was barely visible. I would never forget that night. As with most people our age, every year I went trick-or-treating with my friends. We would walk around one of their neighborhoods with pillowcases, asking the local residents for candy. One of my friends was named Ashley. She lived in a gated community, so my parents felt it was very safe to be trick-or-treating where she lived. Besides, The parents would stay close to us wherever we went, whichever house we wanted to go to, so we never really thought about how safe we were or weren't. We went from house to house asking for candy as usual, and just had a really good time. It was beginning to get late, but we were determined to go to as many houses as possible before the parents decided it was time to head back. And as soon as my friend's younger siblings began to complain, I knew the time was coming soon. They were tired and wanted to go back home. The parents were about to turn back and call it a night, but my friends and I begged them to let us trick-or-treat just a few more houses. They were skeptical about this because Emily's parents were pretty overprotective, but they decided we were finally old enough to walk a few blocks back to Ashley's house by ourselves. It was the same neighborhood, and she didn't live that far away, within shouting distance for sure. As soon as they let us off the hook, we thought this was going to be the best night of our lives. No parents and plenty of candy. Little did I know how wrong we were. After the next few houses, our pillowcases were going heavier and heavier until it felt like we were lugging around bags of rocks. I don't want to carry it anymore. Why don't we just head back, guys? We have enough candy in here to last us for months, Ashley said, dropping her pillowcase and sitting down on the cold sidewalk. Oh, come on. Halloween only comes once a year, and this is the first year we've been alone. One more house, then we'll go back to yours, Emily coaxed. She picked up her bag of candy and plopped it into her lap. Fine, one more, then let's go back, Ashley groaned. We walked a little while, looking for any houses to walk up to and ask for candy. But I guess it was super late, as we didn't see another house with their lights on. I was a little disappointed because we had to go back, but I guess our parents would be worried if we didn't head back now, I thought. As we walked back, we began to notice a dark-colored SUV slowly following behind us. At first, we thought they were just looking for their kids, who might have gotten lost in the neighborhood. I've seen it happen time and time again on Halloween. But as we walked for what seemed like 20 minutes, the car turned every turn we did, and it seemed like it was tailing us. When we stopped, it would stop, and when we walked slowly, it trailed behind us even slower. We were just about to turn to Ashley Street when the SUV sped up and was now right beside us. A disgustingly greasy old man poked his head out and smiled at us. It was a rotten, toothy grin. His eyes were so pale, he looked like he was blind. "You girls look nice tonight," the man said in a croaky voice. He looked us up and down, and I felt like I was going to throw up, especially when he licked his top lip. Thank you," Emily could barely say. She was obviously creeped out. "You wanna hop in? I can give you kids a ride wherever you need to go." He motioned his hand to the hidden back seat of the SUV. Terrified now, the three of us looked at each other. We knew what we had to do. We took off in a run towards Ashley's house. We could see it. I felt adrenaline pump through me. I felt like I ran a little faster than I ever did before that night. Her house seemed so close, yet so far away. But that SUV was still behind us. That creepy old man still behind the wheel. I didn't dare look back, even as the sound of its engines got closer. All I had to imagine was that man's nasty old breath breathing down my neck, and it motivated me through the anxiety and pain. As soon as we got in her front yard, we heard the SUV's tires peel out. The man burned rubber away from us, and we heard him throw a curse in our direction. Something disgusting that I'd rather not say. As soon as we ran through her front door, the three of us broke down simultaneously. The parents were sitting on the couch, placidly drinking wine, until we barged in. Now they were hovering over us, holding us close and trying to get answers out of us. We explained everything, and Ashley's mother immediately called the cops. The police said they would scan the neighborhood, looking for the black SUV. The awful part about this was that nothing ever came of it. No one found the man and his creepy black SUV. I guess the moral of the story is, Halloween is a fun night, but that's no reason not to be safe and watch your children closely. Jerk Clown, submitted by Maiden of Death Roses. I was 17, and this was the Halloween of 2016. It was supposed to be my last year of trick-or-treating. I look a lot younger than I really am. I've had people tell me that I look 14 at most. It always made me self-conscious. I didn't want to look young. I wanted to look mature. But as it was Halloween, I thought it was the perfect time to take advantage of that fact and get as much candy as I possibly could. I was going alone that year. I never even thought twice about it being dangerous. I mean, I was nearly an adult, and I believed I could handle myself in any situation. But I was definitely wrong. Now, if you do recall, late last year, there was that rash of people wearing clown get-ups. They tried to vandalize, scare, and hurt people. I lived in Arizona, and we didn't get a lot of that, not even on the news. So it was something that hadn't even crossed my mind at the time. If I was going to see a clown on the street, it was just a fellow trick-or-treater to me. Anyway, the night went by really well. People were generous with their candy that year. It was like a diabetic gold rush. And at that point, I was walking up to maybe my 7th house. I soon saw that they had their garage door up. I took a quick look to see if they had anything set up. Maybe they had some Halloween decorations and displays. It was pretty dark, and it was hard for me to see inside the garage. But I didn't see anything. It was just really dark in there. I thought it was a bit weird that they'd leave their garage door open like that, especially with so many people out and about. I shook it off and went to the front door. I was thinking that maybe they didn't know they left it open, and when they came to the door I could just tell them. I got to the front porch, and before I could even knock or ring the doorbell, I heard a very strange noise coming from beside me. I turned in that direction, and I saw a clown coming out of the garage. It really startled me, so I put my hand in my pocket and gripped my pepper spray. He slowly began to walk closer to me. Hi, I managed to say. The guy just cocked his head like a curious dog and took another step closer to me. I began to walk away from the porch, ready to use both my pepper spray and bag of candy as weapons. When he was maybe 7 or 8 yards away from me, he sprinted towards me, and all too late did I see what he had in his hand. It appeared to be a machete. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's Halloween. People are just pulling scary pranks on one another. And this is what I thought. But that didn't stop me from being scared for my own life. Before I turned to run, my foot caught on something on the ground, probably a rock, and I fell onto my bottom. But during my fall, I whipped out the pepper spray and dropped my bag of candy. Feeling desperate, feeling like a cornered animal, I sprayed the guy right in the face. Immediately, a lot of his makeup began to melt off of him, and he dropped his machete. It landed sideways on the ground as he grabbed at his eyes. He was obviously in pain. He yelled a couple of curse words in my direction, then turned around and ran away. But he didn't run back into the garage or back to that house. Instead, he jumped the fence to a completely different house. I stood up and saw him running, and he just kept jumping fences from house to house. That was weird. If it was a guy pulling a prank, I figured he would be in this neighborhood. I definitely assumed that he lived at that very house. But apparently he didn't. As I stood there, a little bit shaky, I began to laugh to myself. Freaking pranksters, I mumbled. I shook my head and walked over to the machete on the ground, and I picked it up, fully expecting it to be a plastic toy that weighed only a few ounces. Yet, when I lifted it off the ground, my eyes widened. It wasn't a toy. The thing weighed 15-20 pounds. It was heavy in my hand. I touched the blade, and it was cold steel. I dropped it right then and there, and I began to power walk back to my house. Candy wasn't worth this. Back at home, I told my parents the story, and they made me call the cops. They kept an eye out in our neighborhood for the rest of the evening, but there was no sign of that man in the clown getup. I don't care if his intentions really were to prank people. You don't do that with a real weapon, because now I know there was a chance that he really did want to hurt me. A chance that the people at that house were in danger, and unluckily for me, I was the first person to get a little too close. I think my neighbor made a goat man. Submitted by Garrison L. I live in a small country town in Idaho. In front of our house, there is a thick patch of woods, and to the right, my grandparents and a field, but to the left, there's a couple of other houses. If you go down further across the field, there's a large patch of land owned by an old, creepy man, and everyone in the neighborhood suspects he's up to something. There's a rumor saying that he kills anyone who comes onto his land, and he feeds what's left to his animals. Another rumor says that he does experiments on his animals, making them into horrifying things. Now, every year close to Halloween, a group of kids will go to his house and dare each other to step foot on his land. I never really believed the rumors. They were all too far-fetched to me, but it was still fun to go out there and get ourselves good and scared. That year, for Halloween, me and my friends decided that we would go to his house and fool around. So after school, me and my friends Jake, Carson, Liam, and Henry all made plans to go over to his house. We all agree on a time, and we say goodbye after school and head our separate ways. Jake and Liam live near each other, so they usually walk home together. Carson gets a ride, and me and Henry walk over to his house. To the right of Henry's house are the very woods I mentioned before, and sometimes we would mess around in them before I had to go home. We get to his house, and I'm about to say goodbye to him to go to my place, when we both begin to hear the nearby bushes rustling. Henry, being the scaredy cat he was, just said a quick goodbye and ran inside and locked the doors. I shook my head and laughed, thanking him sarcastically under my breath for leaving me with whatever's in those woods. I take off through the field, full sprint, heading towards my house. Once I arrive, I wait until it's time to go and then head off. I couldn't wait for the scary evening to begin. We all met up at Henry's to gather supplies. Jake and Liam were the last to show up, and when they did arrive, they were carrying some bags. When we left Henry's house, away from his parents, they finally showed us what was in them. It was tons of toilet paper. We laugh and decide we're ready to go. We cut through the field, trying to be as sneaky as possible, staying out of eyesight of the old man. We weren't sure if he was always looking through his windows, or if he was in bed already, but it was best to just be cautious. His house is surrounded by a lot of trees, so it's hard to get good vision of the whole place. Soon we come to the end of the field. If we take another step, we'll be completely out of hiding, but we'll finally be at the old man's house. And of course, we're all too creeped out to step out first, so we start daring each other, and finally, Liam decides to be the brave one. He steps towards the house, and immediately, the rest of us follow. We look around nervously, but seeing that we really were alone, and that the lights were off in the man's house, we got a little too stupid and brave. We started throwing rocks at each other and his house. We even threw a few at the empty shed in his backyard. We were just begging to be caught. I'm sorry, we were just a bunch of dumb kids. We pulled out some toilet paper and began to throw it all over the trees and anything around his house. We then put a few rolls over his place before finally moving on to the man's barn. We've never seen it up close before. We've never seen it from this angle either, because apparently on the side of the barn you couldn't see from a distance. There was a massive hole in the wall. It looked almost like a meteorite had barreled through the wood of it We walk over to the hole and we peer inside the barn. The place is totally wrecked, as if some angry person had gone inside and wrecked the place. Jake walks over to the corner past the hole. The moment he turns his head around it, we hear him say, "Oh crap." Then he runs back towards us. He says there's someone around the corner. He says that we've been spotted. Curiously, I walk over to the corner myself and peer around. But all I saw was the horned head of a goat. It peered at me, chewing on some grass, then pulled itself away to the other side of the barn. I laughed. "Jake, man," I called out to him. "It's just a goat." But Jake had a confused and worried expression on his face. "That's not right. I know what I saw. They were walking around out there. It was definitely a human silhouette. Someone walking around on 2 legs, not a goat feasting on the grass." We go back as a group and look around the corner, and anything that was there before is now gone. Henry, the guy who always expects the worst, starts freaking out, saying that we should just leave and never come back. Getting a little freaked out myself, I decide that that's probably a good idea. Besides, we already finished what we came there for. But as we start moving, Liam stops in his tracks. He's staring at something ahead of us. We ask what's wrong, and he points his finger to one of the buildings of the old man's, and soon we see what he's seeing. It's definitely the silhouette of a person. My stomach sank as I realized the old man had caught us. We were red-handed, and I, for one, didn't want to find out if the rumors were true. I watched as he came towards us, but before any of us could take off in a dead sprint, there was something about the old man's silhouette that seemed wrong, and the way his footsteps sounded. They weren't light footsteps of a person. It was more like a heavy and pronounced clop. Thanks to the dim moonlight, I think we all finally, at the same time, realized that we weren't looking at the old man. We weren't looking at a person at all. What was charging toward us was some creature with the head and feet of a goat, but it was running at us like a man. Henry screams. I will never not recognize Henry's scream, but that one was different. It was deeper. It was more true in a way. I'd never heard anyone so scared, and I had never felt so scared. Unfortunately, when we did take off, making a run for it, we had no plan, so we ended up bolting in different directions. I make it to the nearby shed and cower behind it, trying to see if that thing had managed to follow me. Soon enough, some of the others were piling up behind me. It made me feel a little better, knowing that some of the others managed to follow me, especially in our state of panic. I peeked around the corner, and I couldn't see the goat thing. This really scared me. I had no idea where it was, and I felt like it could pop up around any corner at any moment. Eventually, after a few minutes, we step away from our hiding place, and after seeing that the coast was clear, I do a head count. I was happy to see that it was almost the whole crew, except Liam was missing. And almost right away after I realized that, we heard his scream. It was coming from the barn. That idiot, I thought. He decided to hide in the barn away from this thing. That means he was cornered. I was sure that the barn doors were locked up, meaning that hole in the side of it was the only way to get in and out. So Liam had managed to get himself trapped. We run to the barn and arrive at the hole. It's quiet. Extremely quiet. Once you step inside that barn, you can't see a thing. Not even your own hand in front of you. It wasn't like that before. I glanced up to the sky to see that it had become overcast. The moon was now completely covered. Crap, I thought. Liam was in there, and we had to get him out. Liam, Henry called, which was surprising, considering he wasn't the bravest of the group. Henry? We hear a voice inside. It nearly sounds like Liam's, but it was different enough to keep us from stepping foot inside that barn. Please help me. The voice comes again, and now I'm completely sure That's not Liam. Hey, we hear a voice coming from beside us, and peeking around the corner is Liam. He was never in the barn. Chills went up my spine, and I'm sure everyone else felt the same way when we all realized that the voice coming from within the darkness of that barn, it wasn't any of ours. The group was finally together. We turn around, facing towards Henry's house, and we take off. And not seconds later, we heard those same clopping footsteps from before. But I didn't turn around. I don't think any of us did. I didn't want to see that thing again. I just wanted to be back home, and I wanted to be safe. We make it into the field in one piece, and the further we run away from the old man's house, the more the sounds of the footsteps behind us dissipate, and soon they were gone altogether. Still, though, we don't stop running until we're inside Henry's house. We all call for our rides. None of us are going to walk home after that, especially in separate directions. When I get picked up and I finally make it back home, I do feel a little better, but I know that I'm not going to get any sleep that night. Before heading to bed and staying up to watch TV all night with the windows closed, I do peek out of one of the windows. Before I shut the blinds, I see something I'll never forget. Reflecting yellow eyes, maybe 6 feet off the ground. They're reflecting off of the moon that's been revealed in the sky once more. I stare into them, and they stare right back. I blink, and when my eyes open again, the yellow eyes were gone. I quickly close the blinds and hide myself under the covers, with the TV still playing. My group of friends and I have never seen anything like that ever again, and I couldn't be happier about it. I'm not really sure what we saw that Halloween, but I'm just going to keep on pretending that things like that can't exist in our world. But deep down, I know I'm wrong. I think I saw a vortex. Submitted by Gothica1. I'm pretty sure I saw some sort of vortex or portal. I can't really tell you for sure what it was, but it was definitely unusual and a bit creepy. Certainly a sort of glitch in the Matrix type of experience. Sure enough, the first time I had this experience was on Halloween of 2014. I was working my retail job, and like most places in the small town USA, we were grossly short-staffed, and even as a manager, I had to do multiple people's jobs. That day, I was gathering carts. It wasn't a big deal. I can push them better than our actual cart person. He's a bit lazy. So it was probably better this way. It was late and near closing time for the store. Because of this, all the carts had to come in for the night, so I was pretty happy about it. I was ready to go home and enjoy my Halloween. There were barely any carts in the parking lot, making my job much easier, and most of the entire town was closed already for the evening. Now, I have a thing for looking up at the moon. It always seems to make me happy and refreshed. I don't know why. I don't question it though. As I was pulling in the last of the carts, that's what I did. I walked through the empty parking lot, looking up at the bright moon. Now, there was a forest nearby, very close to our building, and something inside me was screaming at me to look in that direction, so I found myself glancing in the tree line here and there, then looking back up at the moon. Suddenly, knots began to form in my stomach. Not nervous knots. This was something else. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut, and then I felt this electrical feeling around me, the way you do when it's about to storm. There were no clouds in the sky though. I looked back at the tree line once more, looking for the source of what was making me feel this way. I was looking for something that I couldn't see. And then suddenly, it happened. A single blue-purple light appeared high above the trees and hovered there. After a few seconds, it dropped suddenly and made a hook shape that faded from that blue-purple to red. Then the thing just popped, and it was gone. I stood there, that strange electrical feeling going away. I was more perplexed than I'd ever been. Something didn't feel right about those woods. Fast forward to December of 2016. I had put that moment from 2014 in the back of my mind, but every once in a while, it still surfaced. You know how things like that do. You have no answers, and it just bothers you over and over whenever you did remember it. Now, I no longer worked at that store or anywhere near my town. I worked on the outskirts of a city that overlooked uninhabited marshland. I left work in good spirits one day and was talking with my coworker Pete. It was late and all the lights from our work were out, so the only light now was in the far distance of the city, below where our work was. All of a sudden, that strange feeling from those years ago came back. My stomach was in terrible knots, and it felt like a current was moving through me. Pete continued on as normal. He walked over to his car and got in. But I stopped. Whatever this feeling was, it was wanting me to look out over the marshlands. It wanted me to stare into that complete darkness. When I did, there it was. That same strange purple-blue light just popped into existence out of nowhere. It hovered for several seconds, then dropped like before, going from purple to red. Then it popped and was gone, leaving me with a feeling of dread, like something bad was about to happen, that I needed to get home right away. I never told anyone about this at the time. I knew what they'd say. It was just some swamp gas, a shooting star, or firework. And trust me, that's not what it was. As I stood there staring in the darkness still, I heard a commotion to my right. Pete had slammed his car door shut and was running over to me. He was frantic, asking me if I had just seen that. I was kind of relieved that I wasn't the only one anymore. I told him I had seen it, and I told him it wasn't the first time. For another 15 minutes we stood there. He couldn't stop freaking out. Our boss soon came out of the building and saw us both standing there. Pete ran over to him, telling him we'd just seen a UFO or something, and I'm not sure he believed either of us. I went home that day and I thought about it. I was eager now to talk more to Pete the next night, but to my annoyance and anger, when I did ask Pete the next day about what had happened the night before, he acted confused. When I reminded him of the encounter, he said he had no idea what I was talking about. The expression on his face was genuine too. He was very much confused and didn't remember. He said he remembered getting into his car, then coming out to talk to me about work, and then eventually he just drove away. Now I was panicking. That's not what happened. I even said that to him. I explained to him what really happened the night before, but he denied it. Why would someone going home suddenly decide to come back out of their vehicle just to talk about work? Eventually, he grew tired of my conversation and said that that's what he remembered. He didn't know why we remembered different things, and then he set about to do his job. To this day, I don't know if Pete decided that he just didn't want to talk about it, or if for some reason he didn't remember, but I know I never will. Because whatever that was, or whatever it is, I feel like I'm going to see it again soon. Probably next year. I can't shake that feeling. And again, I don't know why. Lover's Halloween Creeper. Submitted by Anton Nightworker. I was 17, living in England. I was dating a girl named Beth. It was Halloween night, and it was a little cold and a bit foggy outside. That night, Beth and I met up in Sheffield, near where she lived. We spent a few hours together, just messing about, when she said it'd be fun to go to the park nearby. This park was like a massive playing field. It had football pitch lines marked out with a bench or two around the outside, and at the back of these benches there was wood. So it was so quiet, there was no sound there whatsoever. Beth took off her jacket, and I placed it on the bench. We sat down and me and Beth began to kiss, and one thing led to another. Suddenly, I heard the sound like someone walking through leaves. We both stopped, and I asked, "What was that?" She said that she didn't hear anything, so we ignored it. But not a minute later, I definitely hear the sound of a snapping stick. I stopped and looked around. This time we both heard it. It was over in the distance, and creepy enough, we saw the outline of a tall man. He was trying to be as quiet as possible as he walked over towards us, and the closer he got, the more I could tell how tall he was. He was easily 6.5 feet, a massive man, and a creepy sight to behold at this time of night. He was carrying something in his hand, and looked like a large, heavy bag that could have been carrying balls of some sort. Whatever was in the bag was heavy and round for sure. We jumped up and ran into the nearby woods as fast as we could, and by this time, the woods sounded alive. You could hear owls and all sorts of bugs. It made everything a little bit more creepy. We ran until we got out of the woods, when we remembered that we had left Beth's jacket out there, and there was no way we were going back. Not yet, anyway. So I gave her my jacket and I walked her home. And on the way there, we tried to figure out what had happened. The next day, when we went back together to get her jacket, it was gone. And we could only assume that that man had taken it. He was the only person around. The only person that would have been around on a Halloween night. So if he really did take it, what did he want with it? Who was he? And what was he carrying around in his sloshy bag? Hallows Eve Nightmare. Submitted by Zara Leaks. On Halloween back in late 2015, I hosted a sleepover with two of my friends, Scarlett and May. May was timid and jumpy, but Scarlett was always the confident one. Anyway, we met up around 3 p.m. and set up a tent in my back garden. It was a pretty nice one, and had a carpet and a cozy place to hang out in. We set it up next to the back gate, which at the time was old and rotting, and when standing next to it, the average adult stood 2 feet over it. We all went trick-or-treating after we set everything up. It was around 7 by then. We met up with some other friends and generally had a really good time. We went back home around 10 p.m., and with the British weather being kind, it was dry all evening, and thankfully the neighborhood was pretty nice, so it was very peaceful that evening. We roasted marshmallows, played Truth or Dare, then finally laid down to sleep when it was pitch black out. The fairy lights in the garden barely illuminated anything, so it didn't bother us much. Out of nowhere, in the middle of the night, something woke us up. It was a creaking sound coming from the back gate. May shot up from her drowsy state. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked in a frightened tone. And just as she said that, we heard a cough coming from someone outside the tent. We were full alert now. Scarlett covered May's mouth in case she was going to scream as we listened to the silent night. When the deep, throaty voice came, we almost jumped out of our skins. "You kids want some candy?" A hoarse voice called to us. It sounded like an old man, someone who had smoked way too much in their lifetime. The rattling came from the gate again. "Come on, I know you're in there," the voice called out. Tears formed in May's eyes, and I couldn't move. It was like my 13-year-old self was paralyzed. Scarlett looked at me and nodded. She showed me her fingers and counted down. That was when we were going to run. When she hit 0, we all made a mad dash back inside the house. I'll never remove that image from my mind. When I turned around, standing at my gate, I saw the man. He had gray, long hair. His beard was matted and disgusting, and he had the most horrific look on his face. It was like pure evil. He looked hungry, but not like a person, but more like a starving predator. as if he wanted to harm us that very moment. The bolt on the gate, luckily, was across, and as he tried, he couldn't get in. But behind those bars on top of my gate, I saw something gleaming in his hand. A butcher knife. There was no mistaking it. I gagged in fear as I saw it, and as we made it to the back door, I turned the key and we ran up to my mother's room. She didn't believe us at first, but after looking out of her window, she ushered us inside, locked her door, and called 999, which is our 911. I then heard knocking on my front door. He must have gone around to it, I thought to myself. But the knocking soon turned to banging, and I heard the old man cussing from just outside. When she heard the sirens, she got off the phone. Then I heard a single curse coming from the man before he stomped away. His footsteps disappeared into the distance when we heard a police car pull up. They never saw the man. Therefore, they never caught him. They didn't find him even after we gave all our statements. That quickly ruined our Halloween, and we all slept in the living room after that, or rather, we pretended to sleep. Clowns at the Car Wash, submitted by Coez Nicole. I was 21 years old, visiting my boyfriend. Before this happened, we often went to the gas station 10 minutes away from us for snacks, usually early in the morning. Now we don't go to the gas station past midnight because of this incident. Anyway, do you remember when the clown sightings were happening last year? Because I sure do. It was Halloween, and like every other time when I spent the night with my boyfriend, we woke up at around 2, maybe 3 in the morning. And that's usually when we were hungry and we were craving some chips. Now, my boyfriend and I are different types of paranoid, and this entered my type of paranoid. As we walked out of the house, it was way too quiet for my liking. The location where the house was, it's almost country, but there is a highway about 5 minutes down the road, and to get to a certain part of town you have to take the exit that passes his house somewhat. I'd usually see about 3 or 5 cars passing just as we're walking out the door, but not that night. It was silent. Not even the wind was blowing or the usual sound of a car somewhere in the distance. Looking around, I decided we'd better get in my car. Maybe it was just the Halloween night getting to me. Now, to get to this gas station, you basically have to act like you're heading to the highway, but instead of taking a right at the light, you take a left. On the other side of the light, you've got the high school and some apartments. High school's on the right side and apartments on the left, and in front of those apartments was a car wash. The type of manual car wash where you put quarters in and you get to wash your car by yourself. On the side we were on, there was a gas station that closes at midnight. Anyway, driving down the road, my boyfriend and I were making small talk. There wasn't much to talk about, other than what the plans would be when we officially wake up in the morning. The light turned red, so I naturally stopped in the turning lane. As I felt uneasy the moment I stepped out the door, I was still observing my surroundings, taking everything in that I could. There still hadn't been another car on the road besides ours, which was only getting to me more and more. Then I turned and looked at the car wash. I saw a grayish dark truck parked there. It was in one of the washing bays, but wasn't being washed. It was weird, but I continued to look around some more. And that's when I saw a clown walking around the car wash. At first it got my attention because it was weird, until I saw another person wearing the clown suit. He was coming around the other side of the car wash, and they both appeared to be holding knives. What the? I thought, when I was interrupted. "Babe, the light's green," my boyfriend said, as I got one final look at another clown who was now staring at my car. His face was lit up enough that I could see a painted smile on his face. There was a painted-on smile, but his actual face wasn't smiling. He was giving me a cold, dead-in-the-eyes stare. He tilted his head to the side like he was thinking. Then he for real smiled, a creepy big grin, probably because he realized I was looking at him. Then he waved something in front of his face, It was a baseball bat. I called my boyfriend's name, or more like whispered, and I used my head to point in the direction of those clowns. As soon as he noticed them, he screamed, "We need to get the hell out of here!" Hearing him scream like that, it brought me back to life. I kicked the car into reverse and pressed my foot to the gas. I made a U-turn and began driving back to the house, and just then I realized I'd left the door unlocked. I contacted one of my boyfriend's brothers. He wasn't happy about being woke up. I asked him to lock the door for us. He refused to do it until I told him what we just saw. Then we drove to the police station and told them everything. They didn't seem to care, or they didn't believe us, but to this day I want to know, what were they up to? And why did they have those weapons? Were they just trying to scare people? Or did they want to hurt them? I just never thought I'd have my own creepy clown sighting. True trick-or-treating story, submitted by Lichika14. I was 14 and living in Virginia Beach. It was Halloween of 2016, so that meant it was the time of the year when you can dress like any fictional character you want, then go out and get candy from kind and friendly strangers. Well, that's what I always thought of it, until that year. It was just me and my friends that day. They were Jay, Angelo, and Josh. We had planned on going trick-or-treating that night, so we hit the suburbs for the first time to get those enormous candy bars. That year we dressed in all black, looking like those maniacs from The Purge. Now, before we headed off into the suburbs, we didn't really know where this specific neighborhood was. All we knew is that it was the best one to go to. The place was more expensive and upper class. People there had more money for bigger candy bars, and that's all that mattered to us. I typed it into the GPS of my iPhone as best I could. It said they were 30 minutes away, so we took off. Along the way, we stopped at a local grocery store to get some drinks for the trip. When we walked in, the place was empty, except for the clerk in the front who was talking on his phone. We got to the drink aisle, and my friend said that there was a man with a beard following and eyeballing us. I didn't really care. They could have been pranking me for all I knew. It was the season for it. And even if they were telling the truth, it was probably just a man shopping for some last-minute candy to give out. When we got out of the store, it was 6 p.m., so we had to get to the suburbs fast before trick-or-treating officially started around here. Otherwise, no full-size candy bars for us. My friend Angelo suggested that we cut through a forest that had a trail leading to the suburbs behind the grocery store. I didn't even know a shortcut existed, so we all agreed to take the shortcut. The sooner we arrived, the better. When we headed for the back of the grocery market, I felt like someone was following or watching us. I quickly shook it off and forgot about it. On we went into the forest. In the woods, it was very misty, probably from a lake or a pond nearby that I didn't know about. But to be honest, the whole scene kind of creeped me out. It looked like a forest from a scary movie. All in all, it just made us walk a little faster, just to get out of those woods sooner. To pass the time, we began to tell ghost stories to each other. Then one of the guys ended up talking about the man they had seen in the market, saying how tall and dirty he was, and how his beard looked disgusting. Then it got quiet for several awkward moments, when out of nowhere, off to the side of the trail, we heard something. Psst. We were freaking out, yelling at each other, saying, "Why'd you do that? Are you trying to scare me?" Then when it went quiet again, we heard something else. "Hey, I've got some candy for you." And out from the bushes walked that tall, dirty, bearded man from the market. That's who I later figured out it was, as this was my first time seeing him. He had followed us all the way out here. For what reason? We all sprinted in different directions, heading straight off the path of the forest. I could barely see anything. The moonlight was mostly blocked off by the canopy, and then the next thing I know, I'm lying on the ground with my vision blurred, and my head was in agony. I had hit my head on a big oak tree, but now I wasn't alone. Someone was touching me up my chest and caressing my cheeks with their hands. When my vision slowly came back, I saw that it wasn't any of my friends. It was the man. He was sitting on me, touching me all over. He had this delighted look on his face that sent chills down my spine. I guess he didn't realize that I was conscious again, because I kicked and screamed so suddenly that he fell back away off of me, and I ran out of those woods until I hit the trail once more. There I found my friends calling for me and expecting the worst. Once we were together again, we called it a night. We didn't want to be out any longer. I especially wanted to just go home. I wanted to take a shower because I could still feel his hands touching me. What was he planning on doing if I had never come to that fast? But a bigger question remains on my mind. What had he already done to me while I was unconscious?
The One Before the Universe, from Twilight Born. Read by Darkness Prevails. It was late in October, 6 days before my birthday. My mother asked me what I wanted most as a gift. I paused to think of an answer when my elder brother said to me, "Why not just get more toys? Then we can all play with them." Honestly, at first, that's what I was thinking. But then I remembered my grandmother and what she once told me. So instead of toys, because we were living in a one-room apartment with 2 adults and 4 kids, I replied with, "I want a real home where we can have family over." My mother was taken by shock for a moment by my response. She probably assumed I wanted toys too. After her shock, she said to me, "Well, little one, if we do that soon, you won't be able to have any new toys for a while. Is that okay?" Without any further thought, I answered, "Yes." So that night, while my siblings were asleep, I saw my mother looking in the newspaper. Now that I'm older, I'm sure that she'd been looking for a while. She wasn't simply going to get a new home because a child asked for it. But I think, deep down, I gave her the push she needed, and maybe I helped a little bit, letting her know that she didn't need to spend on my birthday, as long as we could find a new place. I sat down to help her look. We searched for a reasonably priced place, and could accommodate a family of 6. I saw a place in Sylvan Beach, New York that was open for sale and was quite cheap. My mother said to me, though, "Don't get your hopes too high. With a price like that, it's gonna go fast, and there's probably something wrong with it anyway." I replied, "That's okay. We can handle it." She smiled as she tucked me in for the night and said to me, "All right then, we'll check it out tomorrow. For now, get some sleep, okay?" The following day, we went to the house. It was perfect, or at least it seemed perfect to my child mind. The sellers seemed way too eager to be rid of it, but none of us knew why. My mother asked how soon we could move in. The sellers said they were ready to go at any time, so she made an offer, and the sellers were entirely willing to work with any of our needs. To my mother's joyous disbelief, we were moving in no time. My mother called her boyfriend to bring my siblings and our stuff, and we were moving that same day. My mom said that she'd never seen a mortgage move so fast. Soon we were settling in, and my mom was unpacking while calling various family members to brag about her new home. 5 of our family members came over to see the house and visit. Everyone was happy for us, but we did have 3 family members that came over that had always been odd. These 3 in particular did not practice Christianity like the rest of the family. In fact, they were Wiccan. We loved them and never really viewed them in any other way except family, until that day. Because when they came over, instead of a congratulations, instead of being happy for us, they told us that we made a mistake and that we should leave and get rid of the house as soon as possible. My mother, being the kind woman she was, didn't take outright anger with this. She wanted to trust them. But we finally had a home, and we were committed to it via contract. So we couldn't do anything about what they said, and she let them know this. Those 3 family members outright refused to enter the house. They said they felt that something was inside, and that they were afraid of it. After a few months, we all began to notice something quite strange. My mother and her boyfriend were always lovey-dovey when outside, but the moment they came inside, they seemed aggravated, irritable. It was as if pure hatred had taken over, constantly arguing over nothing. One night, my mother and her boyfriend had 7 friends over, late night drinking. I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the kitchen to grab a drink. I saw them in there drinking and making light of everything. I grabbed a glass of milk, and my mother, a bit buzzed, said it was because of my birthday wish that we finally had a new home. However, just as I was about to take a drink, I felt something. I don't know. It felt like something entered me. I was frozen and paralyzed to the spot, before falling to the ground like a tipped-over statue, screaming. I wouldn't know until later what I screamed, but apparently my mom said that I was saying, "It's trying to take me." At first, it must have looked like a child trying to get attention, but in a split moment, my mother said that all of them saw something they'll never forget. My body was lifted from the ground. My mother ran and grabbed me, had her boyfriend and all their friends grab me as well. She said that they all felt something trying to fight against them, tugging at my body, trying to pull it upwards, as if gravity had reversed. All at once, as quickly as it started, it all stopped, and I felt something leave me. As soon as I was aware again, I immediately jumped up and ran to my brother Joe. I was in a panic. When I found him, I jumped on top of him and covered him like a shield. My mother ran into his doorway and looked at me like I was crazy. I'd never seen her so worried, but at the time, it made sense to me. I felt as if something was going to take my brother away. Eventually, I fell asleep in my brother's bed while my mother watched over us. Not too long after that experience, we were all fast asleep when my elder brother woke up, needing to use the restroom. And then he began to scream his lungs out. Apparently, when the kitchen came into view from the hallway, he saw it engulfed in fire. He came and woke me up first, and we ran through the house together, waking up everyone. My mother then got all of us outside. It was the middle of the night, freezing snow. She called 911, but as they arrived, it was a little late. There was nothing they could do. What blows my mind is that we installed all new fire detectors, even had them tested while we moved in. They worked perfectly fine, but that night not a single one of them worked. I can't help but think that there was some sort of force at work here, and it was only by chance, by my brother's freaking bladder, that we made it out alive and in time. I remember few things of when that thing possessed me that night, but what I do remember is feeling something quite old, very old, something beyond ancient. If you ever find yourself in Sylvan Beach, New York, and you find an empty lot in between 2 homes, for your own safety, don't venture into that land, because there's something old and terrifying there. Something that seems driven to kill. Psychotic Stepmonster. From Braindead 22. Read by Deadleaf Clover.
So I had a fairly normal life up until I was 14. My dad got very bad into drugs and got into a relationship with a girl, and we'll just call her Beth. This girl was only about 6 years older than me, which seemed weird to me. My siblings liked her, but I always had a bad feeling about her. Sometimes I would go to the living room where she would be sitting over my dad, singing. I never really thought anything of it until she had a knife. I called the police and they arrested her. As they were taking her out of the house, she said to me, "You just wait. I never liked you. I was going to kill your father and then you'd be next." But that was not the end. 3 years passed, and she apparently got out of jail. I had just gotten my license and bought a brand new car. I was driving to work when all of a sudden, this crazy person starts driving right next to me and swerving, trying to push me off the road. I luckily got out of it by taking the next turn I saw. Fast forward a few weeks, and it's Halloween night. I was home alone, and I made sure all the doors were locked, and all the windows too. I heard a car outside, and I live 30 miles away from any towns or highways, so this was unusual. We have our own driveway that is about 5 miles from the actual road, so for someone to be close enough for me to hear the car was what scared me. I looked out, and no one was there, but I did see a faraway silhouette of a car. I figured it was just someone using our driveway to turn around, so I went to my room and started reading a book. And then I heard a loud bang, and my car alarm started. I looked outside, and it was Beth. She was running to her car and trying her hardest not to be seen. I called the police, and they couldn't find her. To this day, they never have. The damage to my car was horrible, but the worst part was when I walked outside and a pig head fell from above me. On my windshield, there was a letter saying, "Call the pigs on me again. See what happens." This only scares me because nobody knows where she is. The police found her car about 8 miles from my house, but she is nowhere to be found. As of now, I am terrified of when and where we will meet next. All I have to say is, watch out, because I always look over my shoulders, and I now carry.
Maniac in Middle School, from Anon. Read by Zach Baby TV.
Let me first set the scene here. I'm a 14-year-old male, but I was 13 at the time. I went to a middle school that was a nightmare by itself, but that isn't the story for today. It started at the beginning of my 8th grade year. I got math for first period. It was just like any other class. Boring, nothing special, except this one kid. For privacy reasons, I'll call him Andy. Andy always seemed off to me. He just set off a creepy vibe when I was around him, so I tried to stay away from him as much as possible when we chose our seats. After a few weeks of school, we got a seating chart, and with my luck, I sat directly in front of Andy. He was much taller than me. I was a measly 5'2", and I estimate him to be about 5'7". I tried my best to ignore the guy, but he never seemed to stop talking. He would always say disturbing racist things, mainly about how much he hated Jewish people. He would make disturbing jokes about hurting Jews. He made me sick. After Halloween, Andy just disappeared. We were all wondering what had happened, but now I wish I didn't know what he had done. On Halloween night, he knocked on a random door. A nice woman came out and gave him candy, but right before he received his treats, he pulled out a knife and started stabbing her in the stomach repeatedly. After this crime, he ran off, leaving her on the doorstep covered in blood and stab wounds. A few days later, Andy was caught, and he now resides in juvenile detention. I am relieved that he has been caught and to hear that the sweet lady has recovered fully, but it still makes me sick what he had done. Andy, let's not meet again.
I worked in a Halloween orchard. From Alice May 18. Read by Fear the Dark.
I'm a 26-year-old female, and this happened a decade ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. A little information first. When I was 13, I was 5 foot 10 inches tall, and was often mistaken for at least 16 years old. At the time, I'd lived with my uncle, his 2 daughters, and my grandma. We'll call him Jared. Jared started his own business as a pool and spa man, which includes repairs and cleaning, as well as lifting heavy chemicals and other supplies for his business. He is very good at his job. Just one of those guys that people generally like and get along with. We live in Southern California, in a nice area, and many rich people live here because the weather is usually sunny and rarely gets more than about 80 degrees Fahrenheit all year long, despite changing seasons. So naturally, he has quite a few customers that are pretty wealthy. One of these customers, a middle-aged woman, invited my uncle to attend a huge Halloween party she was hosting at her house, and told him that he and his family were welcomed as guests. You see, my uncle was, and still is to this day, a huge fan of Halloween, as well as a fan of scaring people. That was something we've always had in common. So when he heard she was going to have a haunted maze in her avocado orchard, he took her up on her offer and invited me as well. Though I'm not a party-loving person, I didn't hesitate in saying yes, when he said I'd be working in the haunted orchard with him. The party was fun. They had good catered food, but I mostly stuck to my family members and tried my best to enjoy the party. But I was more excited about working the maze. About an hour before the maze opened up, my uncle and I went to go and get ready in our costumes. He went to one of the vacant parts of our huge house, while I went to get ready in the guest house. My job was to be more of a distraction for the people to pass by in the maze. I was dressed in a shorter Victorian-era dress, with fake stage blood that covered my body and clothes, and had it looking like I was hanging by a noose from one of the orchard trees. The plan was that small groups would go into the maze at a time, and I was to be still and draw people's sights away from Jared, who dressed as Michael Myers with an actual chainsaw, was right across the path from me. Hidden in the shadows, he would rev up the chainsaw, and people would run screaming, while he chased them down the path. Half of an hour into the job, and everything went without a hitch. But that didn't last. I heard some loud talking down the dark path, so I got back into character, amused by people's drunk and terrified screams. I could hear about 5 different voices, all of them men. Their words were slurred, so I assumed they had been drinking. The hostess had served alcohol at the party, so I didn't think twice on it. A lot of people drank before going into the maze. I had an uneasy feeling growing in my gut, but I completely ignored it. After all, I was a naive 13-year-old girl who thought she would be safe at a private party. I remember thinking that my uncle had been nearby, so I wasn't all too worried. "Well, looky here," one of them said, and some of them laugh and make catcalls. "She's a cutie, huh?" I remember my breath freezing in my chest, and my uneasiness returned. I was the only person visible, so I knew they were talking about me. I tried to look out into the dark, but couldn't see anyone, due to the spotlight that was shining on me from my feet. It wasn't until they were about 15 feet away did I finally see outlines of the men. "Wow, she is," another man said as they walked closer to me. I was past the point of uneasy and just scared, so much so that I completely froze in fear. Though taller than most, I was still only a kid, and all 5 of these men were about my height or taller. There was no way to fight off or run from them. The men approached me, and I remember them completely reeked of booze. Only 1 or 2 guys' faces were half illuminated by the spotlight. The other faces were at an angle where they were completely black from the shadow, and I remember cursing the spotlight for shining directly in my face. "Hey there, baby," one of them said, getting closer to me. He was literally only inches from me as he and another guy reached out their hands to touch me. How about we leave this place and go have some fun instead? Get away from me, I remember saying, finally finding my voice. Oh, baby, don't be like that, he dragged out. By this point, his other friends were surrounding me to where I was blocked off completely. I looked past them to my uncle's area, but didn't see him anywhere. He must have chased the last group further down the path. I was completely alone. A man had reached towards my chest area, touching me, and I slapped away his hands as hard as I could. I said, get away from me! My heart beat so loud and fast in my ears, I turned and tried pushing past them so I could run down the path and find Jared, but their bodies made a wall to keep me from leaving. What's the matter? Are we not good enough for you? One of the men said, taking hold of my arm. I pulled against his grasp to try and run, and I mentally prepared for the worst. And I remember taking in a deep breath to scream, hoping that someone would take it as an actual sign that I was in trouble, not just another person who was being chased in the labyrinth. Then suddenly I heard the beginning rev of a chainsaw, and all the men looked off to the darkness, where my uncle's figure as Michael Myers appeared in the reflecting glow from my spotlight. I had never been so grateful to see a serial killer icon in my life. What the hell are you doing with my niece? He demanded, rapidly stepping closer to them. I remember being so relieved to the point of almost crying, but I stopped myself. From the look on these men's faces, this was a 6-foot-tall man who was strongly built, due to his job that he worked 6 to 7 days a week, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, a Michael Myers mask, and a very real chainsaw in his hands. Translation: someone who could easily mess them up for messing with his niece. The group of men started to back away from me, and one guy smiled nervously and said, "Hey man, it's cool, we were just leaving." The creepy guy turned to me and he said with this eerie and disturbing smile, "See you later, baby," he muttered. His hands brushed lightly over my stomach. I froze again, chills running up and down my spine. And the men ran off down the path, and my uncle cussing them out and threatening to call the cops as they scurried off faster. He would have run after them and probably would have done something drastic if I hadn't run over into Jared's arms and began to cry. I was shaking violently as the high of adrenaline wore off. I remember him hugging me, then pulling out his cell phone to call my grandma. She arrived and all three of us went to go find the hostess to tell her what had happened. Sadly, I don't think she was able to do anything, due to me only being able to give her vague descriptions of the guys, since they were mostly in shadow, and if she did, I certainly didn't hear anything about it. Even to this day, I can't help but think what could have happened to me that night, if Jared hadn't shown up when he did. There's been a couple of times where the lady has thrown my Halloween parties, and I still go and work with the haunted maze, but I'm never in direct view anymore, and will actively partake in scaring the people. I have yet to be harassed like that ever again while working there, especially since I found out my true scare tactic, crawling like a fast-moving grudge towards people. So I have 3 pieces of advice to anyone who works in a haunted attraction of sorts. 1. Just because you work there doesn't mean people won't start trouble for you, even if it's a private event. 2. Always be close to another worker, just in case something happens. And 3. Always be aware of your surroundings. Just because you're the one doing the scaring doesn't mean that you won't be the one with the traumatic event by the end of the night.
Carnival Creeper from Anonymous. Read by Darkness Prevails. Middle school is best known as a time of change. You start school as a child and leave as a teenager, and that change particularly happens in middle school. You deal with changes in your own friends and yourself, changes in behavior, in the way you think. I moved to a new middle school after 7th grade. This made the changes a lot harder. This story happened around Halloween during my 8th grade year. I was just starting to get used to our new school. I was beginning to make new friends, passing all my classes. Let me just tell you beforehand, we moved into a rather poor area. My dad had lost his job, and we were forced to move into a smaller home. It wasn't super poor, but it was a lot less wealthy than what I was used to. It was a cool October afternoon. Me and my closest friend Daniel were finishing up homework out in the schoolyard. It was about 2 hours past the end of school. We were just about to get going when we saw a man just past the rusted school gates. This was the 80s. There were no cell phones or high-tech devices. Also, not a lot of school safety either. So the man came up to the rusted gates and smiled at us. We knew all about not trusting strangers, but when he got close, we could see that he was about our height, maybe 5 foot, 5'2" or so. He had gray hair and a shaggy beard. We still didn't take him seriously because of his height. He started by offering us a cigarette. Neither of us smoked, even though about 20% of our grade had started back then. Then he said that he was from the school safety department and that we'd have to come with him. We outright said no, but he opened the gate and began to walk towards us. The school was pretty much empty except for the janitors. We made a mad dash to get out of there, and we made it to my place pretty fast. But that wasn't the creepiest part. The following day, the youngest teacher had her classroom in a mess. Apparently, someone had broken in, and they had not only stolen pictures of her in a bikini at the beach, but also pictures of students that had been in there. Not to mention, he left a note on the desk, one that was a bit inappropriate, to say the least. Considering what kind of picture he took of the teacher, and the fact that he took pictures from the students, I've got a strong feeling he was definitely the worst kind of pervert. I'm glad we didn't trust him. Halloween Night, from Isaac the Troy, read by Deadleaf Clover.
So when I was 15, I stayed home from school sick one day. My family is pretty poor, and every adult in the house was at work, and my older brother was at school, leaving me home alone with our 2 cats. My house was a small house with 3 bedrooms, all on the upper floor, with a very narrow hallway about 3 feet long and 2 feet across, 2 bedrooms on the left, and the master plus the main bathroom on the right. I woke up that morning around 12:30 to the front door of my house opening, and I wasn't startled by it. My stepdad and my mom both worked full day shifts every day, so I figured one of them had a day off that day and was home from running errands or something. Upon hearing footsteps coming up the stairs, my bedroom was the one closest to the staircase, I figured it was my stepdad. He walked down the hallway to the master bedroom and into the suite, which I could tell because there was some noise and banging from the bathroom a few seconds after he entered. Now, the hallway bathroom didn't have a working toilet, so everyone who wanted to use the bathroom upstairs had to use theirs. The only other working one was in the basement. The banging continued for about 10-ish minutes and then stopped, and I suddenly heard footsteps thundering from the master down the stairs and out the front door, like he was sprinting. I thought nothing of it. My bedroom door was closed, and one of our cats was in my lap, purring away. So I lay in my room, on my phone, reading, until I heard our screen door creaking open a little while later. I heard his footsteps coming heavily up the stairs again, but without the urgency of before. Now confused, and against my greater judgment, I stepped outside of my bedroom to see what the heck was going on. I looked down the stairs and saw no light coming from the side of the living room where the front door was, leading me to think it was closed, even though I didn't hear him shut it. I turned to where the master bedroom was, and the light wasn't on inside. I looked down at the floor below, carpeted, and I didn't see any indentations like there should have been if someone was walking or running heavily with shoes on. As a 15-year-old wimp, I was now terrified and retreated back into my bedroom. The banging from their bathroom, having been continuous as I was taking in my surroundings, stopped when I closed my door, and the footsteps returned, now stopping right outside my bedroom door. I remember clutching my cat to my chest and holding my breath, heart pounding as I waited for them to leave. And they finally did after about a minute or so, heading back down the steps and out the door, now shutting and locking the front door with them. I waited about 5 to 10 minutes before going out of my room again, cautiously going into the en-suite to see what all the banging was about, but it looked legitimately undisturbed from when I'd used it before bed the night before. Checking the living room and kitchen, I found the same results. I went back to my bedroom and somehow managed to fall asleep again, heart racing from my hours-long panic attack. Before I slept, I turned my phone on silent and put it to charge, seeing as it was about 2. About an hour and a half from when my older brother would come home from school. I shivered, hoping sleep would help me feel better, and I drifted off. I awoke later to the front door opening again, arming myself with my acoustic guitar to go and see who was coming into the house. It was my older brother, and he asked me how my day had been and if I was feeling better. My brother is a bit of a jerk, so I didn't tell him about my terror-filled day, just saying I was fine and staying downstairs to watch YouTube on our PS4 with him, not wanting to be in my room until my family got home from work, or until I finally calmed down. My mom and stepdad came through the front door at 5 p.m., and I immediately asked them if they'd been off work or if they came home during the day to do something or what. And they both said that they had been at work all day and super busy. As my mom used to work delivery for Pizza Hut and a local Chinese restaurant, and my stepdad was an exterminator with a local place. To this day, only my grandmother knows this story, as I didn't tell my friends, or anyone really, about it until now. I kind of repressed it as to not feel super unsafe in my house. But I do know that some people and a cat died in my house in the past. A couple, I believe. It could be a fever dream or something like that. But I'm terrified of being alone in my house.
Party Creep from Anonymous. Read by Zach Baby TV.
It was summer last year. I was 14 at the time. I was changing my clothes for a Halloween party. I was so eager and excited at the time since we rarely have any parties here in the Philippines. So I took my phone and went to my friend's house to fetch her. I said, "Kath, let's go. We might get there by the time the party is over," I shouted at her door. She replied, "Almost done." So, we're on our way when I saw my crush and my ex walking by the park to the party. I hesitated going to the party, but my friend insisted. We arrived at the party. Everybody was looking at me. Me being 14 and all, and did I also mention that my costume was Harley Quinn from Suicide Squad? Just then, I saw a weird dude heading towards the bushes staring at me. I mumbled, "Who the fuck is that?" I ignored him when I got a bit dizzy from all the beer and tequila. I headed for the bushes to maybe vomit, which was a bad idea. I was about to let it out when I saw the creepy guy. I think he's around 30 or something. I said, "Sorry, sir," then headed back to the crowd. Kath asked me what's wrong when I just nodded nothing. As soon as the party was over, my friend and I headed home. Then my crush, ex, and all their friends stopped in front of us and said, "Hey, let's go for a ride." We said sure, just to loosen up a bit or something. We headed for the woods, close to the cemetery. When I looked around the place, as soon as I glanced to the right side of the truck, I saw that creep at the party. We had only stopped for 30 minutes to smoke some cigarettes. All of a sudden, we all at each other looking around. We kept on hearing some footsteps circling us. It didn't seem like it was just one person, more like a group. The footsteps are getting closer and closer. We're all starting to freak out. Then, out of nowhere, my adrenaline rushed and I started shouting, "Who the fuck is there?" Then we all heard the laughing. Not just any group laughing, but a really creepy loud laugh. Stupidly, we all looked around. After that, there was silence. Then I felt something grabbed me. It was so dark I didn't see it coming. My ex, pulling as hard as he could, shouted to his friend, "Start the fucking car! Everybody get inside!" Then he managed to pull me from whatever that thing was. It still haunts all of us, especially me to this day.
My dad's creepy high school friend. From Choi Longa. Read by Fear the Dark.
I was 8 years old when I experienced the scariest Halloween of my life. Halloween was my favourite holiday as a little girl. I loved getting spooked every time October came around, but I never realised just how spooky Halloween could get. It all started one evening when I was shopping at Safeway with my dad. My mum died when I was a baby, so Dad and I were extra close, and we liked to spend time together. Just as we were checking out, I saw a lady by the exit staring our way. She was looking right at me. The lady continued to stare for the entire checkout and didn't stop. Although I was young, I still knew to keep my eye out for strangers, and I thought it was strange that this lady wouldn't stop looking at me. My dad didn't notice, as he was busy paying for groceries. Once he was done, we headed to exit the store, and we had to pass the lady as we walked by. The lady stopped us, greeting my dad. "Hey Koi, how have you been?" she asked him. My dad seemed a little surprised at this, and he studied her a little, because he didn't know who she was. "Oh, come on, you don't remember me?" the lady continued. It took my dad a few seconds, but he finally made a recollection. The lady was one of his friends from high school, whom he hadn't seen since graduation. "Bella," he said, now seeming a little embarrassed for not remembering her. "Hi, how have you been?" A moment later, Dad introduced me. "This is Langa, my daughter." "Hello," I greeted her. Bella didn't greet me back. Instead, she looked at me and frowned. I almost thought she was angry at me, but why? I didn't even know her. "Koi, it was nice to see you again." Bella gave her attention back to my dad. I looked at Dad to see if he picked up on Bella's negative response, but I couldn't really tell if he had. Bella left with no more said, and I was glad. She wasn't very nice to me, and I was hungry. Dad said we'd get pizza, and I was looking forward to it. It didn't take me long to move on from that. After all, I was just a kid and thought my pizza was more important. Once we went home that night, I pretty much had forgotten about the whole thing. Until a few days later. When I was hanging out with my best friend Sue-Ann, her dad had taken us to get ice cream. I had to use the bathroom and excuse myself from the table. I was washing my hands when suddenly a woman appeared in the reflection of the mirror. She was behind me. I instantly recognized her. It was Dad's high school friend again, Bella. "Hey there, sorry if I was rude to you a few days ago. I was having a bad day and I was tired," Bella told me. "Oh," I said. "That's alright. Do you like shopping?" Bella abruptly changed the subject, with an overly kind smile on her face. She seemed to be in a much better mood now than she was last time I saw her. Yes, my aunt takes me shopping, I said, not quite sure why she'd be asking that. It must be hard that you don't have a mother to do those kinds of things with you, Bella suddenly said. I felt shocked. How could she so lightly bring up my mother when she didn't even know me? And even more shocking, how did she know I didn't have a mother? Did Dad tell her? I suppose he must have. This was starting to upset me. I never liked people talking about how I don't have a mother, and I really didn't like that this woman I didn't even know was talking about it to me. Bella realized I was upset, because the next thing she said was, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought that up. I was just thinking that maybe someday, if you want, I could take you shopping. We could have a girls' day out." I didn't know what to say at this moment. I knew she was my dad's old friend, but why was she talking to me? Why was she interested in taking me shopping? I finally told Bella, I have to get back. My friend is waiting. I gave a nervous smile and stepped out of the bathroom. I spent the rest of the day with Sue-Ann. We were playing around in the fallen leaves out of my backyard. However, I hurt myself as I jumped in the pile of leaves because I fell wrong. My wrist was twisted and it really hurt. Dad gave me an ace bandage to wear for a couple of days till it felt better. A week went by and nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was the day before Halloween. During recess at school, I was outside with Sue-Ann. We were playing with our jump ropes. Sue-Ann started to feel cold. "Langa, I have to go get my jacket. I'll be right back." She ran off and I was alone. My school had a big baseball field and I was at the far end by the fence. I decided I would continue jump roping until Sue-Ann returned. I began to jump when I casually looked behind me, only to see a figure standing right at the fence line. It was once again Bella, and she was looking right at me. I stumbled on my jump rope, startled at once. I stared back at her, wondering what she was doing behind the fence, back by the woods, at my school. And why did she keep running into me? She continued to stare blatantly at me. Honestly, I was afraid. "How's your wrist? Does it feel better?" Bella asked. "Wait, how did you know about that?" I asked, again shocked that she knew this personal thing about me. Bella chuckled. Her chuckle sounded like an ugly, old screeching bat. "I knew you hurt your wrist last week while playing in the leaves." Bella continued to grin with that ongoing stare. Oh, that grin gave me the chills, and still does when I think about it. I glanced back towards the school building to see if Sue-Ann was coming back. I have to go," I said, uneasily, and started to step back. I was going to take a run for it to the school building. I needed to get away from this freaky lady. But before I could leave, Bella ran into the woods. "Langa!" I heard a voice from behind me. It was Sue-Ann. Sue-Ann, did you see that lady?" I asked her. Sue-Ann looked around. "What lady?" "That lady that just ran into the woods." I didn't see anyone. Sue-Ann didn't really care, and she got back to jump roping. For the rest of the day, I felt uneasy. I wanted to get home quickly and decided that I should tell my dad about Bella. I was nervous to go out to the bus, and I looked about cautiously as if Bella would pop out of every corner. When I got home, Dad wasn't there waiting for me. Instead, it was my babysitter, Rebecca. This shook my nerves even more. I really needed my dad. He must be working overtime. Dad was a surgeon, and it wasn't uncommon that he'd get held up with patients. I asked Rebecca when he'd be home. "He got hung up at work. He said he should be home at about 8 o'clock. Rebecca let me settle in and put Disney Channel on the TV so I could relax. As I was watching Good Luck Charlie, I was starting to laugh and my mood got a little better. I watched a few funny episodes before I'd head back to my room to do my homework. As I did math, I thought about what happened that day. The thought of Bella showing up to my school out of nowhere was so creepy it was hard to focus on my homework. I kept watching the clock, just waiting for Dad to come home so I could tell him. But the longer I waited, the more I thought that maybe I shouldn't. Was I just overreacting? After all, it was Dad's high school friend. Would he be angry to find out I was afraid of her? Possibilities kept creeping into my head, and I decided that maybe I should just let it all go. So me being a dumb kid, when Dad came home, I didn't tell him, which was a big mistake. The next day was Halloween. I tried to keep my spirits up for the holiday, but I was feeling very off since the moment I woke up. That scary Bella had me checking every corner I turned, in every room, and I didn't like to be outside. I didn't have much fun trick-or-treating, which was a disappointment because I had looked so forward to it all month. When I finally got in bed that night, I had the blankets up to my nose, trying to fall asleep, but my eyes couldn't rest. Every time I shut them, my eyes shot back open in fear. of someone looking through my window. I lay in bed awake for about half an hour, when suddenly I heard a knocking sound on my window. My whole body went stiff and cold, as if it were ice, but I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. However, it was hard to believe that when I heard the same sound again, 10 seconds later this time, more rapidly, and it was so loud I couldn't even pretend it wasn't there. I couldn't breathe, I was so scared. I ran to my dad's room, his lights were out. "Dad!" I frantically jumped in his bed. "There's someone outside my bedroom window!" Dad had obviously fallen asleep because he seemed aggravated. "Langer," he said tiredly. "What's wrong?" He flipped on his light. "I heard someone. They were tapping on my window," I insisted. "Langer, you're just tired." "No, I'm not. There was someone really out there." Dad knew I wasn't going to ease up. He got out of bed to go check my room like he used to do when I was 4 years old and scared of aliens. I knew he didn't believe me and was just doing it to ease my conscience. But I was scared for him. Someone was poking around our house. I wanted to call the police right away and didn't want Dad to get involved. "Dad!" I grabbed his cell phone. "Let's call the police." Dad was just getting impatient now, and he wanted to go back to sleep. I didn't really blame him for not believing me. This wasn't the first time I was scared in bed, and went through nights like this dozens of times. I turned on Dad's phone, only to find that there were 3 missed calls and 2 texts from our next-door neighbours. Chills ran down my spine when I read the message. "We saw someone poking around your house as we came back from trick-or-treating. We called the police," the text read. Terrified, I hurried to show Dad the message, and his attitude changed in a second. I knew it must be Bella, but what did she want? Why couldn't she just leave us alone? Dad ran out of the room and told me to stay put, after checking to make sure the windows were locked in his bedroom. I cried for him. If there's a bad person outside, he could get hurt. What if they had a gun? I hugged the blankets around myself and sobbed, but things got even worse when I heard the glass from our living room window shatter into pieces. Disobeying my dad, I ran to find him, terrified that he would be hurt. And once I got to the living room, I'd never been so horrified than this moment. Yes, it was Bella. She had broken into our house, and she was threatening my dad with a 12-inch long knife. She looked absolutely insane, bloodthirsty and inhuman. I screamed at the top of my lungs. My dad yelled at me to just get out of there, just as Bella was lunging at him, almost stabbing his throat. He grabbed her arms before she could, but she struggled, screeching like a maniac. I thought this was a nightmare. It couldn't be real. Dad screamed at me again to go back to his room and lock the door. But I couldn't move my legs. It felt like an eternity, although it was only about 30 seconds when I heard pounding at the front door. I knew it was the police. Even after they busted into our house, Bella still didn't stop trying to plunge that knife into Dad's throat. I stopped screaming as I watched the police grab hold of Bella, who was still, even now, struggling to kill my dad. She was a lunatic. I was still crying with horror even after the police took the knife from Bella and had her walking out to the police car. Although she still struggled to free herself from the cops, she couldn't get away from them. After Bella was arrested, I later learned that she, to no surprise, had mental health issues and a dying obsession for my dad. It turned out that she was in love with him all her life and wanted to kill him since she married my mum. Bella hated him for betraying her, and she hated me for my very existence. Halloween has never been the same for me. In fact, I hate it every time it comes. I'm 15 years old now, and I still have to check my bedroom window every night before bed. And I still have nightmares about Bella's horrifying grin and her banshee screech. This was by far the most terrifying Halloween. I'd never been so afraid than when I thought that I was going to watch my dad get stabbed to death right in front of me.
Maybe I'm going crazy. From Anonymous. Read by Darkness Prevails. This happened close to Halloween in October of 2016. I was in my room playing on my DS. I suddenly heard a door being unlocked, and then I heard the door open. Now, I thought this was my mom or dad, obviously, but I always hear a key being placed on the table after that. But that didn't happen this time. I then began to hear footsteps, awkwardly slow for someone I assumed was coming home from a long day. These did not at all sound like my parents, so I was terrified and stayed still for a while. Eventually, I slowly sat up on my bed, which caused it to make a slight creaking noise. I then heard those slow footsteps getting closer to my door, followed by scratching. Now, we had a cat at the time, but these steps were far too heavy for a cat. I assumed that maybe it was someone's nails or a weapon they had with them, so I stayed still. I wanted to sigh with relief when the footsteps began to walk away from the door, but then they stopped, and I could hear someone that I didn't recognize talking to someone else. One thing that I heard was, "Yeah, but the lights are still on." After a while, I grabbed a broom that was in my room, and I darted upstairs. My cat had been up there the entire time. I then went into my sister's room. I explained to her what was going on, as she hadn't heard any of it. She didn't believe me, saying that if I heard anything, it was probably the wind. When my parents came home, whoever had entered the house was gone. I told them about it, but my dad said it was probably the wind too. It was weird that my sister and him had the same explanation, but I wasn't having it. I didn't believe that this was anything less than an intruder or something else. Soon after that day, I heard the exact same slow footsteps again, but they never went to my door this time. The thing is, I hear these footsteps quite often, especially at night. The fact that whoever this is returns, but no one else hears them, no one sees them. I feel like I'm going crazy. Surely if someone was breaking in, we'd catch them, or they'd take something. Surely what I'm dealing with isn't some ghost or spirit. Needless to say, we had a very eerie Halloween that year, and I still wonder, what in the world am I hearing? That's the Wrong Prankster, from Anon. Read by Deadleaf Clover.
Back in 2016, me and my friend, Lachlan, thought about doing the best prank ever. The ghost girl walking through the streets. I went to some Halloween store, and they'd sold this white dress that was the perfect fit for Lachlan. The red paint as blood for the white dress, and the long wig for covering Lachlan's face. After I bought that stuff, I went home to set it up for Lachlan. After that, Lachlan tried on the whole costume, and I thought it was scary enough to scare my other friends. I started calling my two other friends, Jesse and Gavin, to tell them to meet each other in the car and come pick me up to drive around the beautiful night at 10 p.m. They agreed and hung up. It's 8 p.m. right now, and it's the perfect time to take Lachlan and his costume to the scary bridge that no one drives through. It took 30 minutes to get there. When I dropped Lachlan off on the scary bridge, I tell him, "When you see the lights of the car, walk like the ghost girl. See you when you're done with this perfect prank." I drove back to the house and waited until 10 p.m. Jesse and Gavin are here waiting for me to hop in the car. Jesse's the driver, and I ask him, "Can I drive for tonight?" Jesse says, "Sure, why not?" He lets me drive, and we start having a good night. And this is where the fun begins. I start driving through the same streets I drove to drop Lachlan off at the scary bridge. But this is where things get odd. I drove 20 minutes, and I saw Lachlan walking on the road. Not the bridge, the road. Jesse and Gavin saw it and tell me to drive away now. I said, "Wait, I need to text Lachlan about this." I texted Lachlan, "Dude, why are you 10 minutes away from the bridge and walking on the road?" A few seconds later, and Lachlan texted back, He said, "What do you mean?" "I'm at the bridge waiting for a prank to start." My heart dropped when I read that. I texted back, "Wait there, I'm picking you up. This prank is canceled." Lachlan is 10 minutes straight from this other prankster. Jesse and Gavin still telling me to go back. I tell them, "We need to go past that prankster." Jesse said, "No way." I start driving past whoever is in a ghost girl costume, but when I passed and saw the girl, it wasn't a costume. Her face is like the scary girl's face from Scary Maze. I drove faster to pick Lachlan up quickly. 10 minutes later, I made it to the scary bridge, and Lachlan is just sitting on a rock waiting for me. I honked at him, and he came in. Lachlan asked me, "What's going on back there?" I told him what happened. Lachlan looked very concerned, and told Jesse and Gavin it was meant to be a prank, but some ghost girl interrupted it. I drove back, and 10 minutes later, at the same road we saw the ghost girl, she was gone. I just want to get back home. 20 minutes later, we arrived home safely. We all talked about what just happened back there. After the whole conversation, Jesse and Gavin head home. Me and Lachlan said goodbye. I asked Lachlan to spend the night with me before he headed back to his home. I still don't know who or what that was on the road before getting to the best prank ever, but all I know is it's not there anymore.
Zach's Story, from Zach Baby TV, and read by Zach Baby TV.
This happened last Halloween in 2018 in my hometown of Bloomington, Minnesota. There is this one really great suburban neighborhood that we love to go to. These places were known too. It's like everybody knew each other and decorated the whole area. It was really amazing. But of course, like most small towns, there's always that one house. The one house that is different from the rest, that does not associate with anyone else in the neighborhood, the one that refuses to do anything with their lawns, the ones that are just plain old, mysterious, and creepy. Well, that's where the story begins. A couple of my friends dared each other to actually go up into that house and stay there until midnight, as it was rumored to be abandoned. But nobody truly knew if anyone lived in that house. Nobody had the guts to actually go up there and knock on their front door to find out. There's rumors of things being seen in the windows, weird noises coming from the basements, and sometimes people say that they have seen things around the property. Of course, these are all rumors, but we wanted to put those rumors to the test. So, that Halloween night, it was about 7:30 in the evening. The sun had just set. Everybody was dressed up in their Halloween costumes, and the whole town was running wild as usual on Halloween night. But this night was special. Tonight, we go on our final adventure before college. Tonight, we're gonna do something that we will regret for the rest of our lives. Myself, my friends Junior and Sarah approached the front porch stairway leading to the front door. The wind was so cold it just brought shivers down my spine. We slowly walked up the wooden steps as it creaked until we reached the front door. We all kind of looked at each other. I don't think any of us really had the balls to actually knock on the door. I mean, we've never even seen anyone living in this house. But I know for personal experience, I have seen lights on in the upstairs. And I've heard things. But I've never been man enough to actually try to investigate any of these sightings or hearings or rumors, period. Especially not on Halloween night. Out of all nights, This was probably the worst time to try to man up to anything whatsoever when it came to this property. But here we are. I lifted my hand into a fist position and went to knock on the front door. As I motioned and made 2 claps on the wood, the door slowly creaked open on its own. Did you guys just see that? That was probably the wind, Junior said. Sarah didn't say a thing. I barely even knocked on the door, dude, I replied. Yeah, whatever. Let's just get this over with, okay? This is all Sarah's idea. What? Sarah said in defense. And we all slowly and cautiously stepped inside. I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. It was pumping so hard. I mean, I'm already overweight, so my blood pressure was already a tad high for my age, but jeez, I was really freaking out on the inside. I just didn't want to show it in front of my friends. Okay, guys, so now what? I asked. Yeah, I'm actually surprised any of you even stepped inside, to be honest, Sarah said sarcastically. Well, this is your idea, Junior said, and I don't back out from nothing. I ain't scared of this place. Shoot, it's just old, that's all. Yeah, I don't know if I believe this whole haunting thing either, but this place is truly creepy, I added in Junior's defense. Well, Junior told me that he's not afraid of anything and that he is the baddest dude that there is. So, yeah, let's go ahead and put that to the test. And since you want to join him, I guess we'll just all tag along together, she said, smiling. There's something really weird about her tonight, I said to myself. She's got bigger balls than me. I wouldn't even have came in here if it wasn't for them. Anyways, we started walking forward past the pantry down to the door to the basement. Okay, we're not going down there, right? We're just going to walk around the kitchen and check out the living room, right? I asked them. Oh, somebody's scared, Junior said, smiling. No, I'm just saying, it might be dangerous down there. Who knows? It might be full of mold or something, I said. But I knew they weren't buying it, and they then knew that I was scared. And that just made things even worse for me. Well, since you're so chicken, Zach. What? I said. I'll go first. Well, if you're going to volunteer, go right ahead, be my guest, I said. We each pulled out our flashlights, and Sarah slowly turned the knob, opening the basement entry door. There was a strong, chilling breeze that blew out from down below. I don't know how this is possible, because it's underground, but it smelled incredibly disgusting. It smelled like death and decay, and God knows what else. I can't even truly describe it. As me and Junior stood back, Sarah slowly walked down the wooden steps into the basement. And within seconds, the basement door slammed shut right in front of our faces. The wind chill stopped and the smell disappeared. We suddenly heard the cries of Sarah screaming, trying to run back up the stairs, but something was happening behind that door. Something we couldn't explain. All I heard was banging and clinging and her screaming for help. We rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside. We banged and banged on the door. We even tried to find something to bang on the door with, but there was nothing in the house. It was completely empty. We tried our shoulders, which failed. We tried kicking the door down. That didn't work either. When we tried to put our weight to the door to try to see if we could break through, we heard banging coming from the other side of the door. We both jumped back, and I almost fell on my ass. Holy shit. Sarah's not alone down there. I reached for my cell phone, but I didn't have any service. I'm gonna go outside and make a call then, Junior yelled, and he started running backwards, leaving me behind in the kitchen. Junior, wait, don't leave. That's about as much as I could muster when I saw that dark, misty silhouette from the stairway, grabbed him, and rushed him up the stairs like he was as light as a feather. Now, mind you, Junior is a good 300 pounds. He's a big dude. It happened so fast. All I heard was his screaming as he was being yanked up to the second floor. I started running to go up towards him to see if I could help him out. His screaming stopped, and that made me stop. I was incredibly scared at this point. Do I investigate and try to help my best friend, or do I run outside and try to get service and call the police? I chose to continue up those stairs and try to help my friend. I walked up halfway through the staircase, and as I glimpsed upstairs, I saw my friend. He was pinned upside down in the open room, arms stretched out like an upside-down crucifix, and his intestines were dangling down, hanging down on the floor from his stomach. Blood was splattered all over the facility. I threw up and shit myself as soon as I saw my friend. I instantly tried to pick myself together and raced down the stairs towards the front door as quickly as possible. As I was going down the stairs, I heard thumping noises like something was chasing behind me. I dared not to look back. I knew for if I was to turn back, I may possibly be next. I ran as fast as I could through the common area to the front door, opened the door, and ran as fast as I could down the stairs onto the main street. I turned around, half crying and trying to breathe. While I was gasping for air, I saw those eyes. Those red eyes of something silhouetted in the darkness of the open doorway. And then the door slammed shut.
Happy Halloween.
A Scary Drive Home from Zombie Fan and read by Fear the Dark.
This is a true story that happened to me over 20 years ago, somewhere in Maine, but the details are still very clear in my mind. Halloween is my absolute favourite holiday, and I love decorated houses, businesses, etc. While driving somewhere, I'll usually pull over and park to look at every detail of a well-decorated location. This one particular time I was driving on a back road around 11:30 p.m. on a cold night near the 31st. As I went by this house, I noticed a graveyard scene that looked interesting, with a low ground fog that added a spookiness and reality to the scene. I pulled over and sat with my car idling, as it was cold out, to look at this wonderfully decorated front yard. It was an elaborate graveyard scene, complete with body parts strewn about, bodies hanging from trees, lots of gravestones, bats, rats, skeletons, and some graves were partially dug open, with zombie hands and heads, looking as if they were digging themselves out of their own graves. It was very quiet and very eerie, excellently and painstakingly done, with lots of details to include inscriptions on the gravestones. While I was sitting there quietly, enjoying every moment and joyfully noting every detail, suddenly a man with a mask leapt out from behind a gravestone, started a chainsaw and ran, and I mean fast, right towards my car. He was dressed like Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th, Part 2, with a dirty pillowcase with eye holes for a mask, and overalls with a flannel shirt. I sat there for a moment, stunned and shocked, as I never expected this, and then took off like a shot down the road. He chased my vehicle for a while, and when it was clear he wasn't going to catch up, he just stood there in the middle of the road, smoke coming from the running chainsaw, watching me drive off. As I think back to this event, I have several questions. I recalled that the house itself was totally dark, with no lights on anywhere, except one outside lantern to shed light on the scene. There were no vehicles in the driveway and it seemed as if no one was home. So I'm thinking, this dude is just sitting there in the dark and the cold, late at night, just hoping a vehicle would happen to drive by on this rural back road. Wasn't he cold? There weren't any other vehicles on the road. How did he know I was coming? Did he know that I would pull over to sit for a few minutes looking the scene over? Did everyone who went by do that? How long was he out there before I came by? Wasn't he uncomfortable kneeling and crouching behind that gravestone for a while? The idea that someone would go to all that trouble just hoping that someone would drive by and stop long enough for him to come out running with chainsaw in hand, that idea in itself is freaky. Was it really just a prank? Or was it some demented soul who was looking for a chance to do something more than just a scare under the guise of a Halloween scene? I'm glad I'll never find out. I'll just accept that he was looking for a harmless scare. But who really knows?
Sleepy Hollow Scares from Joseph-122. Read by Dead Leaf Clover.
Whenever people think of Sleepy Hollow, they tend to think of Ichabod Crane, the Headless Horseman, and what happened the night Ichabod disappeared. My story doesn't involve any of these people, but it does involve the town of Sleepy Hollow and how it changed my perspective of the supernatural. But before I tell the tale, I think it's important to know a few things. First, I have gone to Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow a couple times before this, usually as a class field trip, and while I definitely was creeped out by the stories, I never believed wholeheartedly that there was something supernatural. Second, my perspective on the supernatural has always been foggy to say the least, because my father is a devoted Catholic and my stepmother is a Protestant. But my stepmother and my sister have always had the ability to see spirits and were always more connected to the supernatural than I was. But because of my parents' different viewpoints, I was never quite sure which one to believe more. Of course I believe in the supernatural, but I never thought it would affect my life. Now that that's out of the way, I'll tell my story. This happened either my senior year of high school or after I had graduated. I remember it happening in the fall, or specifically, just before Halloween started. My girlfriend at the time, Victoria, always had a great love for anything that came from the American Revolution. And although the legend of Sleepy Hollow takes place after the Revolution, it is still tied to colonial America. And like my sister and stepmom, Victoria had a connection to the supernatural that I didn't. And so, we always took trips over to Sleepy Hollow, and the one place we usually visited was Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. So one day, Victoria and I are visiting the cemetery like we always do. But on this day, we decided to do something a little different. We headed a little further into the cemetery. I thought nothing of it. After all, a lot of people were buried here. One of the tombstones we came across was that of Washington Irving, the man who wrote about the legend of Sleepy Hollow. And as we headed further into the cemetery, we came across a mausoleum, and it belonged to a woman named Leona Helmsley. We couldn't go into the mausoleum because the doors were closed and locked, but that didn't stop us from trying to look through the glass doors. After trying to peer through the glass for a few minutes, Victoria's mother was waiting for us at the car just a few feet away from where we were standing. We headed for the car, but as soon as I got into the car, I had a really bad burning feeling on my left shoulder. I didn't know what was wrong with me, so I rolled up my shirt so that I could see what was going on. I used the window from the car as a mirror, and I will never forget what I saw. On my left shoulder, were claw marks the size of tiger claws. And they were fresh. Victoria and her mother were completely shocked when they saw them. I knew in an instant that these were not made by human hands, because if they were, I would have felt them from the instant I got them. And they weren't made by any tree branches passing by, because there were no trees above or near us when we were at the mausoleum. After seeing the scratches, her mother took us out of the cemetery immediately. And I think after this experience, it was the last time I ever went to that cemetery. And if it wasn't, I never went near that mausoleum again. I can't even recall the last time I've been to that cemetery after this. I think the only reason that I didn't get more permanent damage done to me was because I was wearing my chain and the medallions that I have had on my neck ever since I was a baby. My chains include a cross and a St. Joseph's medallion that were given to me by my grandfather. So in a way, I had avoided something far worse than just a few scratches. I don't know what it was that attacked me, or why I was the only one affected by it, but I do know this. After this experience, I wholeheartedly believe in the supernatural. If someone were to ask me, "Do you think there's a such thing as spirits?" I say to them, I don't think, I know they exist. And I may never see the Headless Horseman, but there are definitely evil spirits in Sleepy Hollow. So if you ever plan to go there, you best be prepared.
Haunted as a Child, submitted by Jennifer D. My name is Jennifer, but most people call me Jenny. I'm a 23-year-old female from a small town in Kentucky. I grew up in a family with 3 brothers, my mother, and a plethora of stepdads, and my 2 grandparents whom we visited quite often. As a child, I remember experiencing a lot of paranormal things that I just could not explain. There are a couple of events that I remember as if they happened yesterday. For now, I will stick with the story that happened when me, my mother, and 2 of my brothers lived in a small trailer. I was about 9 years old when these events happened. Back in those days, my mother moved around a lot. My oldest brother lived with my grandparents who never moved. But me and my other 2 brothers were dragged around from home to home, usually older trailers, and we're always changing towns and schools. In this particular trailer, I had the middle room. It was fairly small, but I was used to that, so it wasn't a problem. The problem I had with this room started maybe a few weeks after we had settled in. It was mostly at night, after everyone had gone to bed. I would be trying to fall asleep, and I would hear what sounded like someone whispering. I would be able to hear my mother and brother snoring or breathing heavily in a deep sleep, so I knew that it couldn't be them. A few times I could have sworn that someone whispered my name. It terrified me, and I tried telling my mother about it. Naturally, she told me everything was fine, and that it was probably a dream or my imagination. The whispering continued to happen, and as much as it scared me, I didn't try telling my mother anymore because I knew she would not believe me. So I braved through it night after night. Then something else happened. Now this could be an odd coincidence of sorts. I'll let you decide, because it's fairly strange now that I look back on it. At the foot of my bed, there was a hole in my wall covered by a piece of duct tape. I never bothered it. I only ran my fingers over it to discover that it was covering the hole and left it be. Well, one night, I woke up and I felt very scared. It was really dark in the trailer, and I was afraid of hearing the whispers again. So I quickly jumped up out of bed and I turned on my light. I sat in my bed for a bit, calming myself down and looking around my room to make sure nothing had been disturbed. That is when I noticed the hole in the wall had been uncovered. I looked at it, inched a little bit closer, discovering the tape that had been on it, resting on the floor. What was strange is that the tape had a few dents and maybe a small hole in it, like something had pushed it out from the other side. Again, this could well be a coincidence. Maybe a mouse pushed it out. But after that night, things started to escalate. The whispers started to die down a bit, but were replaced by other happenings. I would see what looked like a black, shadowy blur race back and forth in front of my doorway. My mom kept a very small light on at that point, so I was able to see it. Once it paused in front of my doorway, just a shadowy mass, before darting off again. I could hear my mom snoring and my 2 brothers deep breathing, so I knew it wasn't their shadows.
That and their shadows would have casted themselves on the wall, and they would have had a human shape, unlike this. The floors were also very creaky. No matter how silently you tried to walk, the shadowy mass never made a noise. A few nights later, I began hearing scratching on my wall. I tried debunking this as best as I could. Maybe it's a mouse again, or maybe my pet turtle I had at the time had gotten out of his box. I leaned over to look in his box, and I found him there, sleeping peacefully. Okay, it had to be a mouse then, so I laid back down and I turned on my left side to find that my blanket was moving. It looked as though something was pushing it up from underneath, and it was right at the wall that the scratching was coming from. Fear gripped me as I slowly reached a hand out and swiped the covers away, looking at the small gap between my bed and the wall. I uttered a frightened gasp when I see what appeared to be a shadowy hand pulling back into the darkness. I froze for a moment and I began to cry. I turned on my light again and I stayed there until daylight shined through my window, exhausted. Finally, in the morning, only when the light was up, did I fall asleep. When I did wake up, I remember telling my mother about my experience. I would have as soon as it had happened, but my mother hated being woken up. And just as I thought, she once again said it was a dream or my imagination running wild. I was frustrated. I was scared. I had to continue sleeping in that room. Around Halloween of that year, my mother purchased 2 skeletons on stands. They were bride and groom skeletons and had buttons on their heads that you pressed to make them sing. Well, being a child and already scared of spooky things for obvious reasons, I was a bit scared of these skeletons. They were just a bit shorter than I was, and while I did think their singing was funny, they were still pretty creepy to me. It really didn't help matters when my mother decided to store them in my closet once Halloween was over. I guess we just didn't have anywhere else to put them. I objected, but it was no use, so I made sure that my closet was closed tight at all times, terrified that I would see a grinning skull peeking out at me if there were any cracks. My closet consisted of 2 sliding doors that were a bit broken, and it was challenging to get them shut all the way and to keep them that way. After the skeletons were put there, I had a few uneventful nights of peaceful sleep. No whispers, no scratching, and no shadowy masses or hands. I began to think that maybe I was just being silly. So one night, while everyone else was watching television in the living room, I decided to be brave and face my fears. I scooped up one of the 2 puppies we had just gotten and took them to my closet with me. I opened it up, and those 2 skeletons stood there, the groom in front of the bride, just as I had left them. I poked around at the groom and pressed the button on his head, giggling at his singing. After a few minutes of this and feeling slightly more at ease, I decided to move them so I could have better access to my closet. Well, that's when it happened. It was almost like it was in slow motion, as I suppose a lot of things can seem to be when you're scared. I had stepped back and was about to put my puppy down when I looked up and the groom's skeleton's hand, and I'm not kidding you about this, his hand reached out as if it were trying to grab me. What's more is that his hands, as well as the bride's, were made out of hard plastic that was really thick and could not be bent or posed. But his hands still moved. The fingers bent as they grabbed at me as if trying to close around my arm. I went wide-eyed, and my puppy, who had also witnessed the event, yelped, jumping out of my arms and rushing to the living room as fast as his little legs could carry him. I followed suit, right after slamming the sliding doors on my closet shut. I was crying and shaking when my mother asked what had happened. I told her, and I insisted that I did not want to go back to that room. She looked slightly worried, but I could tell she still did not believe me. However, she did finally give in and let me sleep in the living room. I had to have her go get my blanket and pillow out of my room, and for the next few nights, I slept in the recliner. I thought about that event over and over. I kept trying to rationalize it, but nothing I thought of would fit. I know I hadn't knocked the arm by accident, as there was a decent gap of space between me and that skeleton when I had stepped back. That and the arm had reached forward, along with the hand making the grabbing motion. That would never have been possible with me simply bumping against it. Not to mention the puppy was just as scared as I was. As a matter of fact, he never went back to my room. I don't blame him. As the nights went on, I began to miss my room. I missed my own TV and my toys that I loved playing with. I finally decided that this was the last straw. Now, my family was fairly religious, and we went to church regularly, so I believed in God. I know that not all people do, but this was the only way I knew to handle it myself, seeing as how no one else believed me. Even my grandfather had laughed at me. So I took every Bible I had and I placed them in various parts of my room, under my bed, next to my bed, at the foot of my bed, on my dresser, under my pillow, everywhere. Then I actually shouted at whatever had been scaring me. I told it that this was my room and that I'm not being forced out of it anymore. I was tired of it scaring me, and I was done being pushed around. I was quite proud of myself. Then I looked at the wall and saw the hole. I had never liked it, so I took fresh duct tape and I put it over the hole. Then, being a Christian, I formed a cross out of duct tape and I taped it on the hole as well, and even made a few more around it. It sounds silly to a lot of people, but hey, this is all I knew, and it did make me feel better and safer. After that night, I don't recall anything else happening, really. I'm still not sure what on earth it was that kept me terrified. Was it a ghost, a demon, maybe even hallucinations? I have no clue. I was never actually harmed, but who knows what could have happened if I let it go on. Maybe the scares would have just continued to escalate, or maybe more bad things could have happened. I've had experiences over the years. I think that maybe those experiences in the trailer were specific to that trailer in that bedroom. Ever since we moved, I haven't had any similar issues. And even those skeletons are in my possession still, amazingly enough. They have never moved again, and they no longer scare me. I hang them in my room for decoration, and I enjoy them now as I still love Halloween. But if I ever have children, I will be sure to listen to them if they ever tell me that anything like that is happening. I would rather be wary and discover that there really isn't anything there than to just ignore it and brush it off as my child's imagination and let them be terrified and have to deal with it on their own. I still deal with a few things like this myself, and I always have a light on at night now, and I have a cat as a companion, so I'm never fully alone. I may have beaten it, but I think I'll always be afraid of it happening again. The Bloody White House. Submitted by Rain. I need to give a little bit of background first, because it does play a role in this story. Growing up, I was the kid who was considered the crazy troublemaker, as I would sneak out at night and go to the abandoned buildings that had a lot of ghost stories around them. At some of these places, I never experienced more than just sounds and some little forms of appearing and disappearing things. I mean, I was a kid, and I was looking for things like that. It's not like I was going into these creepy old buildings expecting to see an axe murderer pop out, just something small, something paranormal. Having been around these buildings a lot over my childhood, I got pretty used to seeing weird things. I remember seeing my first ghost when I was about 4 years old, though my memory is slightly fuzzy, I guess because I was so young. My grandfather, who had passed, came to visit me and my younger brother in the middle of the night. I screamed when he left the room. My mother came jogging in as my scream woke them up, and even my mother admits to hearing her dead father's voice say, "Good night, dear," through the baby monitors. As she got to my room, there were bloody footprints leading from the center of the hallway to my bedroom, and they stopped at the end of my crib. And this next story starts on a regular Halloween night. I was 15 at the time this happened, so I was feeling too old to trick or treat with the other kids. But my younger siblings needed someone to take them, seeing as they were still pretty young. At the time, my father was at work, and he's a trucker, so he was gone for several weeks at a time, and my mother was too busy studying for school. So I ended up taking them, walking them around house to house. I even ran into a few of my friends that were also walking their siblings. We let them go up to the house in the group as we stopped a bit and talked. We made arrangements to meet up after we were done walking our siblings around to trick-or-treat. 20 minutes later, all the young kids were done with their trick-or-treating, so we all went home and met up at an old bridge, trying to figure out what we can do to entertain ourselves for the rest of the Halloween night. Now, they mentioned this ghost story about this white house in the swamps that wasn't actually too far from us. But I remembered that that was one house I was always told to stay away from, as my mother visited it, having the same interest in exploring abandoned places as I did. She has had her own bad experiences there, but that is a story for another time. I was told the story about it all over again by my friend. The house was built back in the day when there were still slaves. A man caught his wife cheating on him with a slave and was pregnant with his child. They were planning on running away together, to leave her husband and her other kids behind. Later that night, the man killed his whole family and tortured the slave. That night, he tied the slave up in the slave house and gutted his wife first, and then placed a noose around both of their throats, throwing her and her baby over the bell tower, hanging them in that manner. Then he went after his children, killing one in the forest around their house, chopping him up with an axe. He drowned his daughter in the pool in their backyard, then went back to the slave house, showing him what he did to his slave's lover and his child, and then commenced torturing the man to death. Once he finally died from blood loss, the father killed himself in the main room in front of the front door. They were all found a week later, as the father had not gone to work in a while, and it was his employee's payday. But as the accountant walked up to the building, seeing his wife's and baby's slowly decaying bodies, buzzards picking at their corpses, the accountant walked up gagging at the sight of them, holding his shirt to his nose, smelling his sweat. But that was much better than the smell around him. He managed to climb the stairs and take long strides to the front door. The smell was stronger than before. He clutched his nose even tighter, so much so that his knuckles turned white. He banged on the door, hard, mentally begging someone to answer so he could escape this horrid smell. He banged 3 times, pulling his hand up for the 4th time. He hit it once, and it opened to reveal a swarm of flies around the father's body. He looked up, and as a flood of the smell of rotting flesh slammed into him, he vomited and ran away, going towards town, wanting to get away from this horror. That is where the story ended. But I knew better. I knew that the story did not end there. No, it continues into more blood and gore than what she had told them, and for their sakes I did not correct her. Still though, the blood drained from their faces and they turned pale just from that story. So I didn't want to sicken them any further from the rest of the story. But for you listening, I'll make an exception, because from what I've heard, the man did not kill himself. The townspeople somehow found out about what he had done. Someone had found him bathing in the blood of those he had killed, so they tied him to a pole and burned him at it, just like a witch. No one knew how a man like that, who was so wealthy and famous around town, could have murdered his whole family and his slaves, let alone bathe in their viscera. I seem to have gotten a bit sidetracked, so I'll go back to us on that Halloween night. My friend that was telling the story was visibly shaking. She seemed excited and scared at the time. I could not tell, but she then asked them if they had the guts to follow her into the building. We all stood standing on the old bridge, waiting. They eventually all said no in shaky voices that seemed to match in each other's fears, and I stayed silent. Then she laughed and called them all chickens for not having the guts to go into that house. Then she boasted that she was not scared and would go in without them, no problems. As soon as she stated that, she instantly regretted it, because she knew that they would jump on her statement and dare her to do it. And they did. But there was one rule that none of them wanted to follow, and they also didn't want to break it. That rule was that someone else had to go up there with her and by her side the whole time to make sure she did not go back on her dare. It only took a few minutes before they decided I would go, even though I was about to volunteer, because I knew what could happen at this house. Or at least I thought I did. The 2 of us headed toward the house, the rest of the group waiting at a safe distance away, but still able to see what was going on. We found the house and we climbed the stairs. My friend was holding my arm the whole time. I could tell she was really scared, but was still going through with it. In my guts, something was screaming, "Don't go in that house," and we passed several warning signs and no trespassing signs on the way. The house on the outside was all boarded up, only a few windows had slight cracks showing even the door was boarded up, but not enough to keep 2 curious teens out. We pushed the door open, slipping inside. It was dark, barely any light seeping through the windows and doors. It smelled really musty and a bit like mildew, which is normal in most abandoned places. We turned on our flashlights, remembering that we had brought them with use for this very moment. We walked up the stairs, looking around, analyzing the whole house, looking for something and hoping that we didn't find anything terrifying. We walked around, waiting for something to happen, but not sure exactly what. It was getting closer to 12 at midnight. The dare was only to stay in the house until 12:30. That is when the worst is supposed to happen. So we climbed down the stairs after exploring the whole house, not seeing anything interesting. My friend seemed satisfied, as we had not seen anything spooky during the whole exploration. I think she was feeling a bit better. I have to admit, I was also getting ready to get out of that house. It was almost time and I was excited to be out of the place. When we got down the stairs, I remember it being 11:45. We picked a spot in the light and sat down on the floor. We planned to wait the rest of the time out. She laid her head on my shoulder, getting a bit tired. I was so anxious. The time seemed to pass slower at that point. At 11:59, I stared at the ceiling. Something suddenly felt wrong. I woke up my friend because I felt the temperature drop around me. We stood up straight as the air started to feel thick. My friend grabbed my arm again and held it tight, to the point I could feel her cutting off my circulation. Now, get this, the house began to shake. Literally shake, as if we were caught in an earthquake. After a minute, it stopped. We were terrified right away, to be honest. And the air only got colder. We huddled together to keep ourselves from shaking. We both glanced back and forth around us, afraid that something was coming. And it was. We started hearing voices, dozens upon dozens of voices. Men, women, children, all around us. They didn't sound angry or sad or anything like that. They actually sounded happy, as if we were in the middle of a lively party. But slowly those voices died down, but one singular voice grew louder. This voice was deep, old, and full of hatred. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it grew louder and louder until,
Out, out, out!
This gravelly voice yelled at us. We shot up and ran for the door as fast as we could. I ran too fast. I ended up tripping over a board, falling hard and weird on my leg, but I quickly picked myself back up and ran as fast as I could, limping all the way. My other friends seemed scared when they saw me limping, and she was crying. They helped me get to the hospital. It was a long and agonizing walk, but I didn't want to go confront my mom after this. The doctor asked what had happened. He didn't believe what any of my friends had said, and I did not say a word to them about it. They could only speculate what ghosts we might have seen and stuff like that. They took care of my leg, taking an x-ray and setting me up with a cast and crutches. My mom was called and soon arrived. She took care of the bill and was very irritated and mad the whole way home. She was upset that we had been out so late in a dangerous place and said that I could have died, that I was lucky that my leg was the only thing I broke. It's been about 7 years since then. My knee causes me trouble from time to time, aches coming from nowhere, but I push through it. But every time I feel a tinge of pain in that leg, I am reminded of the foolish Halloween night that changed my beliefs entirely. Hearing those voices, it was all too real, and I wasn't alone in that experience. Now I know that something more awaits us after this life, even if some of us are a bit angry when we pass. Strange Encounter in the Corn Maze. Submitted by Doll Lightful. Anyone who lives in the Tarrant County, Texas, will be familiar with the famous local pumpkin farm at the corner of Hall Johnson. Come October, it's a source of great joy and fun in our community. Families bring their kids to pick out the perfect pumpkin. Groups of mischievous teens dress up in costumes to have some fun, and other things like that. But the main attraction, without a doubt, is the Hall's Pumpkin Farm Corn Maze. They've been growing a new maze each season for years now with great success. Naturally, it's more popular to come at night in the spirit of Halloween. Plus, the cover of darkness also helps obscure any damage or holes that could be seen through the corn stalks. My friends and family have attended for many years, but one year in particular stands out to me. I was a middle schooler at the time, and I was attending with my best friend's family. Her mom waited outside as me, my friend, and her older brother entered the maze. My friend and I, being the young and hyper middle school girls we were, had a fantastic time running around and shrieking at any little thing. Her older brother got into the spirit of things and pretended to chase us through the maze. At this time I got separated from my friend, but I could hear her brother behind me. With a huge grin on my face from the thrill of the chase, I sped down one of the paths. I glanced behind me while running to see if I had lost him. While my head was turned back, I must not have seen where I was going, because what I remembered next was impacting the wall of the corn maze. I should explain that the corn maze's walls weren't just the stalks themselves, but a tough plastic mesh planted in place with metal poles. The owners do this to discourage mischief makers and to keep the maze's routes obvious. It was strange. I felt the impact of the plastic mesh against my arms, my upper torso, and my cheek. Then I was on the other side, in a different part of the maze. It was quiet. No one was there except me. I turned back towards the maze's wall. I must have been running so fast I ripped through the plastic fence, I thought. I squinted in the dark to find that the fence was unchanged and unscathed. There it was, tough and unbroken. I even tested it with my hand, but it stood there still strong, defending the borders from hazards like me. But I could still feel and make out the red indentation marks on my skin in the same pattern of that fence. I definitely hit it. I know for a fact that I had collided with it, but how was I on the other side now? How was I here? I stood there for a while trying to make sense of how I seemingly transported through the barrier, but I couldn't find an answer. And honestly, I was a little bit spooked. I was still intrigued by my strange experience, and I began working my way through the maze to find my friends. I was very eager to be with company again, and I was ready to search for the exit to get out of there. The Witch Broom. Submitted by Natasha's 23. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my grandma used to have an antique shop, which my mother helped run. It was a cold and dark September day when my mom, grandma, sister, and myself went to a yard sale to help my grandma find new stuff for her shop. Among the items, my mom found something she thought she could use for when we could decorate her house for Halloween. It was a small broom decorated with Halloween colors, black and orange. It also had the creepiest ornament in the middle of the handle. It depicted an ugly old witch with a witch's hat on it. I remember I was so scared to even go near it, so you can imagine how afraid I was when my mom bought it. On another day, Sunday to be exact, my grandma asked my mom to run an errand. My grandma was in the store, along with my then 20-year-old sister who began teasing me with the witch broom. "She's going to get you and eat you up, Chanel," she said tauntingly. "Mama, make Keisha stop. She's being mean to me," I cried. Now, there were already incidents where my sister teased me with it before with the broom while I was in the car. This annoyed my mother to the point that she got out of the car, opened the trunk, and took the broom out of my sister's hand. She threw it out of the car and slammed the trunk door. "Wipe your tears away, baby. Mommy made everything better," she said in a calm voice. When my grandma came out of the shop, it got dark very quickly and there was lightning outside. We rushed to get my grandma home, but didn't have to go far because we all lived on the same street. Our house was on a corner, but Grandma and Grandpa's house was further down on a dead end. Before we turned the corner toward the direction of my grandma's house, I noticed something was on the second door of the house, the screen door, but I couldn't tell what it was, and I could not remember if my mom had hung up some decoration before we left that day. I just shrugged it off. I said goodbye to my grandma and we waved hi to Grandpa. We turned back to go straight home, and the wind picked up abruptly. We got out of the car and we had confused looks on our faces as we climbed the steps and got closer to that door. We couldn't believe our eyes when we got up to it. On the wooden door, behind the screen, was the witch's broom hanging perfectly on the wooden door. I was so scared that I almost soiled myself. We had that broom until we moved, after we had a garage sale when I was 14. I'm 31 now, and I still have strange and paranormal things happen to me almost every day. But because it's happened to me so much, I'm no longer scared now. But back in the day, before all of this happened, when I first saw that witch broom hanging there when I knew we had thrown it out, I was more scared than I have ever been. Shoe Carnival of Souls, submitted by Wayward Wanderer. I work at the only shoe carnival here in Adrian, Michigan. The store itself is just over a year old, built and finished in 2015. Everything in the building is new and should be working properly, yet bizarre things have been happening since day one. The registers will beep as if something has been scanned, even when no one is standing behind the counter. The fire alarm was repeatedly going off with false alarms despite being a brand new system. The cameras have blacked out and needed to be replaced, and the radio that plays music over the intercom has randomly gone out, only to start playing again on its own. As for me, I've personally seen a black shadow on the security monitor from the back office. The store was closed and there were only 2 of us left to take care of business at the end of the day. So I definitely did not see someone wearing a dark hoodie or anything like that walk by. But what makes the shadow more disturbing is the fact that after the shadow passed, 3 vertical rows of the socks in the wall were swaying back and forth like someone had brushed by them. A few weeks later, without saying a word to anyone else about the shadow, my manager claimed to have seen a shadow pass by the security monitor over the back door of the store. No one even uses the back door. Back to my personal experiences. I have also heard whispering while cleaning up the children's department, despite being alone on that floor. The overhead radio was off, and the small radios we used to communicate were locked up in the cabinet in front. The small radios are always left to charge overnight, and yet our radios will lose power for no reason, and we can hear staticky, unintelligible voices as well. I now know that my second manager has heard the unexplainable whispering as well while in the back office. In that same back office, while left alone for a few moments, I've heard frantic pounding on the walls and slamming doors that no one else has heard. Aside from the shadow, pounding, and whispers, I've seen something darting back and forth in the reflection of the mirror that shows the children's department to the front of the store. Again, it was closing time and there was no one in the store besides me and the manager, that's for sure. From time to time, items in the store will go missing, only to be found in unusual places. We've lost box cutters, display shoes, and pricing guns, only to find them again stuffed behind boxes or on top of the shelves beyond anyone's reach without the use of a ladder. Just recently, another employee had heard a hissing sound in the back office, and just a few moments later, a manager heard something hissing in the stock room. The city of Adrian was built on former Indian battlegrounds. The culture here is still rich. So if I have to work in this store this coming Halloween, I plan on using a Ouija board to get some answers. I just hope the answers are worth seeking. I think we all know how dangerous Ouija boards can be.